Daenerys Targaryen stood on the prow of the flagship overlooking Blackwater Bay, the sea breeze lifting her silver-blonde hair from her shoulders. Her expression was unreadable. The dawn sun gleamed off the polished scales of her armor, catching brilliant sparks of gold and red along the ridges. Behind her, the ragged survivors of her fleet flew the triumphant dragon standard of House Targaryen, its red-on-black heraldry streaming defiantly in the morning air. Though they had won many battles, the tension coursing through their ranks now was almost tangible. Word had spread the previous night, whispered along the docks, that a messenger from King's Landing had arrived under the banner of parley, seeking an audience with the Queen. And that messenger, in a voice that trembled and yet strove for dignity, had declared Cersei Lannister's decision. The city would surrender without a fight. No one truly believed it at first. This was Cersei Lannister, she-wolf of the Red Keep, the cunning queen who had outsmarted and outlived all challengers until now, the woman whose ruthlessness was a legend as stark as her ambition. She was not one to bend the knee easily, nor would she freely relinquish the seat of power that had cost her so dearly to acquire and defend. Yet the message had been clear. King's Landing was prepared to open its gates to Daenerys Targaryen's armies. The bells would ring, signifying a truce, and the populace would lay down arms. The scorpions stationed along the city's walls would be dismantled. The Golden Company, presumably, would withdraw into the city squares. In exchange, Cersei requested an audience to negotiate the terms of surrender, emphasizing, above all, the safety of the people within the capital. But Daenerys remembered the look in Tyrion's eyes when he shared the news. There had been relief but also wariness. Tyrion, her hand, had pleaded for mercy for the city on more than one occasion. He had already tried subtlety, tried reason, tried appealing to every nuance of Daenerys's moral compass. He had also found himself on the brink of her wrath, especially after everything they had gone through and the betrayals that cut deep within her circle. Now, faced with this unexpected turn of events, there was that flicker of hope in him, as if he dared to believe that perhaps war would not be necessary after all. But there was also the doubt. Why would Cersei, proud and cunning, surrender so easily without the final confrontation? Could it be a trap? Could she, like the spider she had often been likened to, be luring them in to deliver a deadly strike at the most opportune moment? Daenerys turned away from the prow and looked at her advisors. Grey Worm stood at attention, haunted sorrow in his eyes, bearing the scars and the hollow sense of loss from the death of Missandei. Ser Davos was among them, exuding a cautious hope that perhaps the bloodshed could end. Varys was gone from the Queen's council, executed for his treachery, so there was no soft voice now warning of the people's welfare with such urgency. Jon Snow lingered slightly behind the group. He had followed Daenerys to fight the White Walkers, had bent the knee for the betterment of all the Seven Kingdoms, and had grown conflicted over the cost of conquest. He said little, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. "Are we to believe her?" Grey Worm asked, his voice echoing over the stillness of the deck. He did not hide the bitterness behind his question. The memory of Missandei's final word, Dracarys, burned in his mind and fueled his desire for vengeance. He was not the only one struggling with that need. "We have a duty to these people," Tyrion answered. "If she truly surrenders, there's no need to drench the city in blood. We came to free them, not destroy them." His voice trembled with the knowledge of what had happened to those who disappointed Daenerys in recent days. But he clung to the glimmer of a path that did not involve the city's population burning under dragon fire. Daenerys took a breath, recalling what had driven her so far. The dream of breaking the wheel, the knowledge that her father's madness had terrorized the realm, and the vow that she would not follow that path. She had always wanted to be loved, but war and betrayal had hardened her. She had lost so many Yora, Regal, Missandei. She had learned that trust could be the source of heartbreak. This surrender might be an opening for peace, or it might be another lie in a decades-long game of thrones. "We will ride to the city," she said at last, her voice carrying firm across the deck, "and meet those who come under the white flag of truce. We will see if the gates do indeed open. If they do, I will accept her surrender." Grey Worm's mouth was set in a hard line, but he dipped his head in acknowledgement. Jon Snow exhaled a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Tyrion carefully hid his face, relieved. And so the war host of the Targaryen queen prepared themselves. The Dothraki, the Unsullied, and the northern troops that followed Jon. They readied their weapons and formed ranks, but they marched with an unusual hush, for the city's fate would be determined not in a bloodbath but potentially in a moment of negotiation. Even so, the rumble of thousands of feet and hooves moving across the ground hinted at the underlying might Daenerys commanded. High above, Drogon soared in great arcs, a living testament to the Targaryens' right to rule, his roar echoing across the sky. Daenerys had taken Rhaegal's death personally, and this final dragon was her living heartbreak and her unwavering power. If a trap was set, if there was some perfidy waiting within the Red Keep, Drogon would rain fire. Her heartbreak would not allow half measures anymore. Yet, when they reached the outer walls of King's Landing, the scorpions along the ramparts were conspicuously absent. The parapets were lined with city guards, none of them bristling with the usual hostility. They stood with longbows and spears in a cautious posture, but as promised, many of the giant crossbow siege weapons had been dismantled, the scaffolding left bare in places. The gates were closed, but from within came the sound of bells pealing. The clang of those bells rose into the morning air, trembling on the breeze like the voice of a hesitant penitent. As Daenerys and her entourage drew nearer, the massive gates began to open slowly, revealing a group of Lannister soldiers standing in formation. At their head was Ser Jaime Lannister, resplendent in gold armor, though his face was lined with worry and regrets too numerous to count. Standing beside Jaime, of all people, was Brienne of Tarth. Her presence was unexpected but somehow fitting, for she, more than most, had seen both the demon and the faint spark of redemption in Jaime. She looked from Jaime to the gathered forces, her expression carefully composed, as if waiting for a violent outburst that might come at any moment. Next to them stood Qyburn, the gaunt former maester with the perpetual sheen of cunning in his gaze, and an entourage of Lannister loyalists. Conspicuously absent was the Mountain, though no one believed Gregor Clegane was too far away, not if Cersei was still within the city. The Golden Company was nowhere in sight, perhaps stationed inside the walls, or perhaps already preparing some other role. A hush fell over Daenerys' forces as the group dismounted. Tyrion, shoulders tense but chin lifted, walked at Daenerys' side toward Jaime and the others. Grey Worm hovered protectively behind her, hand resting on his spear. Jon Snow walked a short distance behind, trying not to let his tension show. There was no trust here, only a fragile hush upon which the fate of thousands rested. Jaime inclined his head. "Your Grace," he began, voice clear in the stillness. "I speak on behalf of Queen Cersei Lannister. She has made the decision to yield King's Landing to you and to ensure the city's safety. She wishes to discuss terms in the Red Keep so a formal declaration can be made." Grey Worm practically bristled. "The city is ours," he said. "We don't need more parley. Surrender is all that is required." Tyrion placed a calming hand on Grey Worm's shoulder, his voice calm but urgent. "If we can ensure an orderly transition, it will save lives." Jaime met Daenerys' gaze. "Her Grace has asked that you come to the throne room to formalize the surrender. She will lay the crown at your feet in the sight of the court. She hopes you will accept merciful terms." The slight pause before merciful suggested that Cersei knew full well the precariousness of her request. She was not known for mercy herself, and so this plea might be equal parts cunning and desperation. Daenerys looked around. The gates had opened, the city guards were disarmed or at least standing down. The bells were ringing. She had to wonder if the city's population was huddled in fear behind the doors of their homes, uncertain whether the armies at the gates were liberators or destroyers. In her heart, Daenerys remembered Astapor, Yunkai, Meereen, how she had freed the slaves, how they had cheered her, how the great masters had fallen. But Westeros was not Essos, and these were not slaves waiting for a savior. These were common folk caught in the crossfire of dynastic wars. Their feelings toward Daenerys might be terror as much as hope. If Cersei were truly giving up, that was as close to a miracle as any war had ever seen. She gave a single nod. "I will go, but I will not go alone. My guard will accompany me." Jaime bowed. "As you wish. I will lead you to the Red Keep." And so Daenerys Targaryen, once an exiled princess with nothing but a name, now marched through the gates of King's Landing with her banners flying, her loyal warriors at her back, and a swirl of uncertainty in her heart. The claustrophobic streets bore signs of fear, shuttered windows, the absence of foot traffic, the hush that had fallen over alleyways. Occasionally, a face would peep out from a doorway or a child would peer through a window only to be tugged back by an unseen hand. The rumors of dragons and war had preceded Daenerys, and the city had quivered. Now these rumors seemed to culminate in the strange dissonance of bells ringing, an open gate, and no slaughter. To Daenerys, it felt like stepping into the lair of an adversary who was too clever to simply surrender. She could not shake the feeling that each step was weighted with potential betrayal. Could Cersei be hiding wildfire caches in the city? Could she plan to destroy them all rather than yield? The memory of the Mad King's last plan, burn them all, haunted her. She brushed that thought aside, focusing on the immediate reality. The crowds that lined the thoroughfare were frightened, hungry, exhausted by years of conflict. Mothers clutched their children. Old men squinted warily. No one cheered, nor did anyone openly jeer. They watched with eyes large as saucers, powerless in the hands of those whose decisions dictated their fates. Jaime led them through the winding streets, across the city squares, and up toward the massive gates of the Red Keep. Along the route, Lannister banners still hung from windows, limp in the still air. As they climbed the hill to the Red Keep's entrance, Daenerys' eyes flicked toward the ramparts, searching for the scorpions that had once threatened her dragons. They had been removed. Along the walls, a handful of Lannister soldiers stood, but they did not raise their crossbows. They simply watched the approach with grim resignation. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. When they entered the courtyard of the Red Keep, Daenerys saw a row of gold-cloaked guards forming a silent corridor that led into the main hall. Overhead, Drogon circled with a roar that made every soldier flinch, as if reminding them that surrender was their only option. Jaime glanced up uneasily, but pressed on. He and Brienne walked at the head of the group, Qyburn shadowing them. Daenerys walked behind with Tyrion, Jon, and Grey Worm on either side. The Unsullied were at full readiness, their discipline unwavering. Inside the Red Keep, familiar halls came into view, at least to Tyrion, whose expression was a mixture of sadness and tension. This had been his childhood home, a place filled with complicated memories. For Daenerys, it was a place of legends, its name entwined with the downfall of her father, the seat of power that her brother Viserys had often described with longing and desperation. Now she walked its corridors openly with a dragon overhead and her army at her back. A slender sense of triumph, mingled with caution, flickered in her heart. The Iron Throne was just steps away. After years of war, struggle, and unimaginable losses, here she was. Yet it was not the conquest she had envisioned, wreathed in the cheers of a liberated city. The hush was unnerving, and the presence of Lannister soldiers, apparently docile, made her question every corner. Finally, they emerged into the Great Hall, its vaulted ceilings casting deep shadows across the stone floor. At the far end of the hall, the Iron Throne stood on its raised dais, a mass of swords hammered and fused together, a brutal seat that represented centuries of Targaryen rule and the cost that came with it. In front of the throne stood Cersei Lannister. She wore a simple black gown embroidered with gold thread, her pale hands clasped before her. The light filtered through the high windows, catching the gold in her hair. There was no crown upon her head, but it rested on a cushion held by a silent handmaiden who stood nearby. Her expression was composed, regal, and gave little away. Yet Daenerys could sense the tension in Cersei's posture, the slight tightness around her mouth. This was not the triumphant queen who had once blown up the September of Baelor, nor was it the cunning woman who had orchestrated betrayals and alliances to keep power. Something in her eyes suggested acceptance of an inevitable end, or perhaps a ruse whose shape was not yet clear. Daenerys strode forward. The Unsullied spread out behind her, forming a protective semicircle. Jaime and Brienne stopped to the side, glancing at Cersei. Tyrion stepped forward as well, glancing at his sister. Emotions warred in his gaze: pity, hatred, regret, wariness. Cersei's gaze flicked toward him, then back to Daenerys. At last, she spoke, her voice carrying easily in the vaulted hall. I, Cersei of House Lannister, do hereby relinquish my claim to the Iron Throne and surrender this city to Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, the rightful queen of the Undals and the first men, protector of the Seven Kingdoms. Her tone held a slight tremor that might have been bitterness, or might have been suppressed fear. I wish to ensure the safety of my people. They have seen too much death. Let there be no more. Daenerys glanced at Jon Snow, then at Tyrion. Jon's face remained neutral, but there was relief in his eyes. Tyrion's lips were pressed together, uncertain how to respond to his sister's formal submission. Daenerys allowed a heartbeat of silence to pass, letting the magnitude of the moment hang in the air. Here was the woman who had refused to yield at all costs, now speaking the words of surrender before the Iron Throne. Perhaps the entire city was breathing easier at this moment, hoping that the Targaryens' flames would be stayed. But Daenerys could not ignore the lumps of distrust that still lodged in her throat. "We accept your surrender," Daenerys said at length. "King's Landing is mine." She turned to Grey Worm and motioned to him. He stepped forward and took his place near the dais. "I trust you will abide by the terms we set, and you will not attempt to undermine the peace we grant this city." Her voice rang out, edged with regal authority. She half expected a retort, a cunning remark from Cersei that signaled a trap, but it did not come. Instead, Cersei inclined her head, the slightest nod. She motioned to the handmaiden, who stepped forward with the cushion bearing the crown of the Seven Kingdoms. It was wrought of gold and black iron, the same crown Cersei had worn since Tommen's death. She lifted it from the cushion, the metal glinting in the sunlight, and carefully held it out to Daenerys. "Then take it, your grace," she said softly. "It is yours by right, and I place it in your hands so the city may know peace." Time seemed to stand still. Daenerys reached out and lifted the crown from Cersei's hands, feeling the cold weight of metal. It symbolized more than a mere seat in a palace. It bore the burden of centuries, the ghosts of her father, her brother, and countless others. She felt her heart pounding, remembering the times she had dreamt of this moment. She held the crown aloft for a brief instant, and in that moment, the watchers in the hall seemed to draw a collective breath. Daenerys handed the crown to Grey Worm for safekeeping. She would not place it upon her own head in this hall. Not yet. She wanted the coronation to be public, to let the city see the ceremony of it, to let them understand that a new era had dawned. She kept her gaze on Cersei. "You will answer for your crimes," she said, her voice unyielding. "We cannot ignore the atrocities you have committed in the name of holding power. But if your surrender is genuine, and if it spares further bloodshed, then we will show you the mercy you did not show others." Cersei's jaw twitched at that remark, and Tyrion seemed to brace himself. The last time someone had lectured Cersei on her crimes, it had not ended well. But now she did not spit venom or lash out. She stood rigid, a woman stripped of her illusions. "I am prepared to face your judgment," she said. There was a hollowness in her tone, as though some part of her had shattered. "All I ask is that you spare the innocent." Daenerys was silent for a long moment. Her own heartbreak over regal Yora Missandei threatened to rise. She had been denied mercy when it mattered most. She had seen her loyal companions cut down. Yet she also remembered that she had come to break the wheel. King's Landing had known so much violence. Could she grant mercy and still be the strong queen that Westeros needed? She looked at Tyrion, who gave a tiny nod, then back at Cersei. "The innocent will be spared," she said. And with those words, the war in King's Landing ended before a single building burned, before the streets ran red with blood. Lannister banners still hung, but the Red Keep was now in Targaryen hands. Daenerys Targaryen had claimed the throne not by plunder, but by surrender. The city, hushed and disbelieving, began to stir. That day, no dragons set the sky on fire, and no bells rang in vain. The next hours were filled with a tense flurry of activity. Tyrion worked tirelessly with Jaime, Brienne, and Ser Davos to ensure an orderly de-escalation of the city's defenses. The Golden Company, once the proud mercenaries under contract to Cersei, found themselves disarmed, their leaders sequestered in a quiet standoff. Some of the Lannister soldiers shifted allegiance at once, swearing fealty to Daenerys in exchange for their lives. Others simply laid down arms and slunk away, discarding their cloaks in the gutters. There was a distinct sense of whiplash in the streets. The population had expected a massacre and was instead greeted with a surprisingly calm occupation. Jon Snow took it upon himself to coordinate the northern troops, ensuring that none of them ran amok among the city folk. He knew the thirst for vengeance was strong, especially among those who had seen their brethren cut down in earlier battles. But he insisted on discipline. They had not come to slaughter innocents. That did not mean tensions ran low. There were heated arguments, scuffles, curses shouted by resentful Lannister loyalists. But the city did not burst into chaos. The people huddled, uncertain, waiting to see what kind of queen Daenerys would be now that she had the keys to the capital. Meanwhile, behind the closed doors of the Red Keep, Daenerys considered her next moves. She had not come all this way simply to watch the city starve or to run a terrified populace into the ground. If she were to claim her place as a just and benevolent ruler, she would have to act quickly, restoring some semblance of order and ensuring that King's Landing's basic needs were met. Already, she dispatched her captains to take stock of food supplies, to arrange for distribution of grain, to stabilize the city's markets. Ser Davos, with his knack for logistics and understanding of the common folk, proved invaluable. Tyrion, his knowledge of the city's workings still relatively fresh, offered guidance on how best to navigate the labyrinth of power brokers, the guild masters, the wealthy families, the city watch. At midday, Daenerys ventured out into the streets herself, flanked by Grey Worm and a small contingent of Unsullied, along with Jon Snow. Word had spread that the city had surrendered, yet fear lingered. Doors remained shut. Faces peered from corners. Daenerys wanted them to see her, to understand that she was not here to terrorize them. The mother and father with a hungry child by the roadside received coins from Daenerys's purse. The old woman shivering in the shadows of an alley found a cloak pressed into her hands. A crippled beggar trembling near a toppled cart was gently guided to a safe place where food was being distributed. Quietly, uncertainly, the city began to realize that perhaps the Dragon Queen did not intend to destroy them after all. Jon Snow watched these interactions, remembering the various times he had witnessed Daenerys's compassion in Meereen and other cities across the Narrow Sea. Her wrath was formidable, but so was her desire to do right by those under her protection, at least it had been in the past. He could not deny that her recent losses and isolation had hardened her. But perhaps the surrender had opened a door to the better angels of her nature. Even Grey Worm, though his grief still smoldered, did not stop her from these small mercies. Night fell over King's Landing. The city, under normal circumstances, might have been alive with flickering torchlight and the bustle of taverns, but it remained oddly silent. The bells no longer rang, the hush remained. In the Red Keep, Daenerys convened a council of her most trusted advisors in the chamber where the painted table had been moved. Tyrion had seen to that, wanting a large map upon which to plan. Its presence was a reminder of Dragonstone's heritage, and as the flickering candles illuminated the 7 kingdoms laid out before them, they began to plan the next steps. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, her hand resting lightly on the depiction of King's Landing etched in wood. Around her stood Jon Snow, Tyrion, Grey Worm, Ser Davos, and a handful of other key advisors. On the far side of the chamber, guarded by Unsullied, waited Cersei Lannister, stripped of her regal gown in favor of a plain black dress. She was not in chains, but the threat of them hung heavy. Jaime lingered nearby, looking torn between loyalty to his sister and a sense of relief that she was still alive. Brienne stood with him, her eyes darting to Cersei warily, as if half expecting a sudden betrayal. No one had yet decided what to do with Cersei, but her presence reminded them all of the fragile nature of this victory. "Word must go out to the other lords of Westeros," Daenerys said. Her voice carried the confidence of the newly victorious, but beneath that confidence, she maintained a keen alertness, aware that half the realm might still oppose her. "They need to know that King's Landing has surrendered peacefully. Those who wish to contest my right to the throne should see this as an example. The war can end if they kneel." Tyrion nodded, considering the best way to phrase that announcement. "We should issue formal letters, sealed with your sigil, inviting them to attend your coronation. That might encourage them to come see your reign in person, or at least acknowledge it. If any lords continue to resist, we can address them individually." Jon shifted his stance. "The North will want to be sure its own sovereignty is respected, or at least recognized. My people have fought and died against the White Walkers, then marched to help take King's Landing. We all want peace, but we also want to ensure that the North is governed by its own rules. That was why Sansa refused to bend the knee." Daenerys looked at him. Once, his mention of an independent North might have provoked her anger, but her perspective had shifted. She gave a thoughtful nod. "We'll open talks with the Northern leadership. You are my Warden of the North, and your sister is Lady of Winterfell. The details can be settled. But for now, I need their support, not another rift." Jon nodded, satisfied that she was not dismissing the North's unique identity. Cersei, listening quietly, let out a low breath. So you'll let them pick away at your realm, demand concessions in exchange for their allegiance. You're making yourself weaker before you've truly begun, you know? Her voice held the usual edge of sarcasm, though muted by her current predicament. A flash of anger crossed Daenerys' face, but she tamped it down. It's called compromise. You've tried ruling through fear. I've seen where that leads. She paused. It breeds hatred, and I won't make that mistake if I can help it. I want the people to see me as their queen, not a tyrant in a distant castle. Cersei inclined her head slightly. And yet you sit with a dragon perched above the city, you're unsullied and Dothraki at the gates. Is that not fear as well? Tyrion decided to intervene before Daenerys lost her temper. Fear and respect often share a border, sister. It's how that power is used that matters. His gaze met Cersei's. You used it to destroy your enemies with no regard for the innocent. Daenerys means to avoid that path. She's allowed you to live, which is already more mercy than you granted many. A faint sneer curled Cersei's lip, but she did not refute him. The memory of the September of Baelor and her other transgressions weighed heavily, even if she did not show regret for them. She had never been one to show remorse. Before tempers could fray further, Daenerys gestured to Grey Worm. We'll increase patrols in the city. Make sure looting and violence are minimized. The people need to see order and know that it isn't just a new tyranny. If any of the Golden Company men refuse to stand down, we'll deal with them swiftly, but do not burn the city. Understood. Grey Worm bowed. Yes, Your Grace. The meeting broke up shortly thereafter, each person tasked with a piece of the puzzle. Jaime lingered near Cersei, who was escorted back to her chambers, albeit under watch. Tyrion spoke quietly to Davos about the logistical intricacies of feeding such a large city. Jon gazed at the painted table, lost in his own thoughts, perhaps reflecting on how far they had come since the White Walkers threatened the entire realm. Daenerys stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. The moon lit the rooftops, and she could see the flicker of torches in the streets below. Somewhere out there, Drogon was perched like a gargoyle upon a high pinnacle, watchful and majestic. She thought of the many times she had soared over battlefields on Dragonback, the heat of flame rolling beneath her. Even now, the memory caused her heart to clench with the grief of losing Rhaegal and Viserion. Drogon was all she had left of her children. Yet tonight, King's Landing stood unburned. The city was hers through surrender rather than devastation. She tried to savor that as a victory, even if it felt strangely hollow. The cost of trust, if Cersei proved false, could be catastrophic. But for now, Daenerys clung to the fragile hope that this was the first step toward a better rule. Morning came, and with it a stirring sense of normalcy. The markets tentatively opened. Vendors, unsure how to address the new regime, carefully displayed what produce they had. Food was still scarce. The war had squeezed King's Landing dry, but Daenerys' new administrators began distributing emergency stores, rationing out bread and grain. A Targaryen banner was raised above the Red Keep, flapping in the breeze. For many city dwellers, that symbol was a jarring reminder of older stories: the reign of the Mad King, the sacking of the city during Robert's Rebellion. Yet so far, no screams of terror echoed in the streets and no pillars of smoke rose in the sky. Throughout the city, word spread: Cersei had knelt to Daenerys Targaryen. Men argued in taverns about whether she had done so out of cowardice, cunning, or some last-ditch plan to preserve her child. For rumors abounded that Cersei carried Jaime's child, though no one was certain. Perhaps that pregnancy was what compelled her to seek a surrender to spare her unborn child from witnessing the city's destruction. Or perhaps it was all a ploy to lure the Targaryen forces into complacency. Whispered theories abounded. Daenerys ordered that the Iron Throne remain unoccupied for the moment. She wanted a formal coronation in the sight of the city. Preparations began swiftly. Tyrion oversaw the logistical details, choosing a day that was soon enough to forestall further unrest, but not so soon that it looked hasty or disorganized. The throne room was to be prepared for a grand ceremony. Invitations would be sent to the great houses. Raven messengers flew in every direction from the city, carrying notices of the upcoming event. Some houses, weary of war, might hurry to attend and offer fealty in person. Others, especially those with grudges against the Targaryens, might stay away or even conspire behind the scenes. Still, the message was clear: Daenerys was no longer an upstart queen from across the sea. She was in King's Landing, she held the crown, and she had done it with less bloodshed than expected. All the while, Daenerys kept a close eye on Cersei. True to her word, she had not placed the former queen in chains, but Cersei was effectively under house arrest in one of the tower chambers. Jaime was allowed to visit her, and Tyrion sometimes did as well, though their conversations often ended in anger or tears. Tyrion tried to glean whether Cersei had some hidden plan in motion, some final vengeance. If she did, she gave no sign. She spent hours by the window, gazing out over the city that had once been hers. There was an eerie calm about her, the steel in her eyes tempered by an underlying hollowness. "You've given up," Tyrion said to her one afternoon, standing near the doorway of her quarters. The guards waited outside, but the hush in the room felt heavy. "That's not like you." Cersei studied him, her face unreadable. She wore a simple black robe, the luxurious fabrics of her queenly wardrobe left behind. "I've run out of moves," she said quietly. "I was prepared to blow the city to ash if it meant keeping the throne from Daenerys. But perhaps I couldn't do it after all." She paused, her eyes flicking to Jaime, who sat silently in a corner. "I took that path once, and it gave me the throne for a time, but at the cost of everything else. My children are gone. Father is gone. Even the people I hated are gone. Everyone is gone. All I had left was the city, and even that was never truly mine." Jaime spoke up, voice husky. "You've done unspeakable things. So have I in your name. But maybe it's time we let this go. Maybe it's time to let the realm find some measure of peace." He still wore a golden hand strapped to his stump, and he flexed it unconsciously, as if reminding himself that all of this had cost him dearly. Tyrion stared at his sister, searching her face for any sign of manipulation. "Do you expect me to believe your surrender is purely an act of mercy and regret? You must have had some plan, some last-ditch scheme. You always do. Why else would you gather the Golden Company, stash wildfire beneath the city, keep Qyburn's monstrous creations at the ready?" Cersei's lips pressed into a thin line. "I won't deny that. I thought to destroy Daenerys the moment she set foot inside these walls. But I realized there would be nothing left for me if I did. I'd be ruling a pile of rubble. And if I used wildfire, the entire city might go up. Including my child. My unborn child. I couldn't take that risk, not after losing Tommen and Myrcella and Joffrey. Perhaps you can call it maternal instinct. Or perhaps it's the last shred of humanity in me." Tyrion took a step closer, studying her. "So you decided to spare the city?" "Yes," Cersei said, her tone brittle, "and in doing so, I signed away my life, or at least my freedom." She gestured around the small chamber that was now her cage. "Mercy or not, Daenerys will never trust me. She'll want me to stand trial for my crimes. She has every right to. I expect she'll parade me through the streets, or perhaps use my head to send a message to the lords of Westeros." "I made my bed, Tyrion." She looked away, pressing her lips together. "But I did spare the city. If you believe nothing else, believe that." Jaime was silent, but Tyrion could see the conflict etched on his face. Though he had parted ways with his sister more than once, the bond they shared was complicated, shaped by shared childhood memories and heartbreak. He had tried to kill her once, or at least threatened to, but now here they were at the end of a road that had taken them both to places they never could have imagined. In the days that followed, a curious calm descended upon King's Landing. The Targaryen sigil replaced the Lannister banners above the gates. The City Watch, restructured under new officers, began to enforce Daenerys' laws. Street by street, life returned. Bakers opened their shops, blacksmiths hammered on anvils once more, and farmers began to trickle in from the countryside with wagons of produce to sell. Yet an undercurrent of unease remained, for no one knew what might happen if the new queen found cause to unleash her dragon. Fear, once embedded, did not vanish overnight. Daenerys walked among the people, her retinue mindful but not oppressive. She stopped at the ruins left by the battles that had racked the city in recent months, instructing her men to assist in clearing rubble and rebuilding. She spoke with those who had lost loved ones, offering what solace she could. And she carefully prepared for her coronation, wanting it to be a message to the realm. She would not cower behind the high walls. She would stand before them as a queen who desired their loyalty but also their goodwill. On the eve of the coronation, Daenerys ventured out alone in disguise, cloaked in a simple hooded garment. She needed to see the city without the lens of guards and advisors. She slipped past the watchful eyes of the Unsullied, taking only one guard who kept a discreet distance. The moon was nearly full and it illuminated the cobbled streets. She walked among humble dwellings, hearing murmured conversations from within. Through an open window, she saw a family of 5 sitting around a small table breaking bread. The father was telling a story, perhaps trying to distract them from the uncertain future. Daenerys paused to listen, her heart tightening at the normalcy of it all. This was what she fought for, she reminded herself, the chance for families to live without constant fear of war or starvation. She walked further, passing a street corner where a young boy dozed against a wall, a wooden sword in his lap. In her youth, Daenerys had dreamed of the marvels of King's Landing. She had never imagined the city would become hers in this way, the cost so steep. She watched the boy's chest rise and fall, remembering how she had freed the children enslaved in Meereen. For them, she had been a savior. For the children in King's Landing, would she be a foreign conqueror or a queen who stood for something better? Her footsteps carried her to the ruined gate of a September. The building was half destroyed, its stone archway blackened from a fire long past. She found an alcove where scraps of candles had been set, their wicks long extinguished. The stubs hinted that someone had come here to pray or mourn. Daenerys knelt, brushing her fingers over the cold stone floor. She felt the echoes of tragedy, of the faith militants' downfall, of the many who had died when Cersei destroyed the September of Baelor. Even now, the city was marked by that act. And yet Cersei had surrendered. She had not repeated the horror. Daenerys did not know if she should be grateful or forever suspicious. In the silence, she closed her eyes and breathed a prayer to the old gods, or the Seven, or the Lord of Light, whoever might be listening. She prayed that she would be strong enough to be the kind of queen she had promised to be, that she would not fail these people, that she would not become the very thing she once despised. Eventually, she rose, turned, and walked back into the night, the guard trailing quietly behind. Tomorrow, she would take the throne in a grand ceremony for all to see. Everything she had endured, the betrayals, the losses, had led her to this moment. If she faltered, the city would sense it. She had to be strong, and more than strong, she had to be wise, merciful, and just. Could she manage that? She had to try. She owed it to all those who had believed in her along the way, Yora, Missandei, Regal. She owed it to the realm she wished to rule. Morning dawned bright and hot, the sun glaring down on the red tiles of King's Landing. The city buzzed with an energy it had not felt in months, since before the wars and sieges had worn it down. People gathered in squares, near balconies, anywhere they might catch a glimpse of the new queen's coronation procession. Daenerys had decided on a route that would lead from the city gates up to the Red Keep, a deliberate show of her acceptance by the populace she now ruled. She rode in an open carriage pulled by 2 sturdy destriers. Dressed in a white gown embroidered with subtle golden dragons along the sleeves and hem, she wore no crown yet. Her silver blonde hair was braided in a style reminiscent of her Dothraki victories, with small braids interwoven at the back of her head to signify prowess. She sat with regal poise, though her heart fluttered with anticipation. Behind her, Tyrion Lannister rode on horseback, wearing his badge of the Hand of the Queen. Grey Worm and a phalanx of Unsullied marched in disciplined rows. Ser Davos led a contingent of City Watch, attempting to maintain order along the streets, while the Dothraki remained mostly outside the walls, uneasy in the cramped city but present to underscore Daenerys' might. Jon Snow rode further back, accompanied by northern bannermen who had come to bear witness to this moment. As the procession advanced, people lined the streets in cautious curiosity. Some were silent. Others muttered remarks or whispered to neighbors. But occasionally, someone would raise a timid cheer or wave a scrap of cloth in salute. Daenerys met their eyes, offering a gentle smile. If she saw hunger or fear, she remembered her vow to change that. Step by step, the throng thickened. Children perched on rooftops to catch a better view. Women craned their necks, murmuring about the queen's beauty or about the tales of her dragons. Men, reeking of sweat and labor, stopped their work to watch this new regime pass by. The hush in the air hinted at a mixture of awe and uncertainty, as if the entire city wondered whether it was truly safe to rejoice. Eventually, the procession reached the grand courtyard at the base of the Red Keep. A dais had been erected there, with the Iron Throne standing upon it for all to see. Trumpets blared. The City Watch ushered citizens around the perimeter, allowing as many as possible to witness the spectacle. Daenerys dismounted the carriage, her braided hair catching the sunlight. Tyrion, Jaime, who had come at Daenerys' invitation, Ser Davos, and other prominent figures formed a semicircle around the throne. The hush was so thick that one could hear the wind rustling the banners overhead. With measured steps, Daenerys approached the Iron Throne. It loomed over her, a twisted sculpture of swords hammered and fused to symbolize the cost of conquest. The seat of her ancestors. At that moment, she thought she heard a faint whisper echo in her mind, a memory of her brother Viserys ranting about how it was his by right. a memory of her father's madness. She forced them aside, placing her hand upon the cold metal hilt of one of the swords that jutted from the side. The clang of the metal under her fingers seemed to resonate. Tyrion stood at her side, holding the crown. Her crown, the same that Cersei had surrendered, though it had been reforged slightly to incorporate the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen more prominently. Tyrion met Daenerys' gaze, then lifted the crown in the air for the assembly to see. "People of King's Landing," he called out, his voice amplified by the hush. "You stand witness to the coronation of Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, the Unburnt, Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Protector of the Seven Kingdoms." Daenerys slowly turned, facing the crowd. She saw fear, she saw hope, she saw weariness etched on the upturned faces. She wondered how many of them expected cruelty, how many of them dared to believe in something better. In a firm voice that carried through the courtyard, she spoke, "I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as your queen. I have come to break the cycle of fear and bloodshed that has gripped this city for too long. I pledge to protect you, to serve you, and to uphold justice in this realm. Will you accept me?" Silence reigned for a moment, and then a scattering of applause broke out, a hesitant ripple that spread through the crowd. Some called out her name. Others observed quietly. But the ripple of applause grew, feeding upon itself, as though the people had decided to try believing in the possibility of peace. Tyrion's face was sober as he watched. He, too, knew how fragile this acceptance could be. But it was a start. Daenerys knelt, and Tyrion carefully placed the crown upon her head. The metal felt heavy, cold. The jewels pressed against her braided hair. She rose, turning to the crowd. For the first time, she sat upon the Iron Throne, the swords pressing against her back. A hush fell again. In that moment, she felt the weight of every Targaryen who had come before her, Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel, her father the Mad King, her brother Rhaegar, and all those who had worn a crown or died seeking it. She exhaled a breath she did not realize she was holding. "My first act as queen," she declared, her voice echoing, "is to grant amnesty to those soldiers who once fought against me, provided they lay down their arms and pledge loyalty. No harm shall come to them if they keep the peace. We have shed enough blood. Let it end here. I wish to rebuild King's Landing, to see its people thrive once again." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My second act is to call forth the lords of Westeros to swear allegiance or speak their grievances openly in this court. We will build a new realm together, one that does not rest upon slaughter and fear." A stirring among the crowd followed. Some cheered. Some murmured their doubts. But the day was hers. The bells rang once more, not in surrender but in coronation. Drogon roared overhead, a fearsome exclamation point upon this new era. Daenerys looked out at the faces, feeling a swirl of emotions. It was triumph, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, courtiers from across the realm trickled into King's Landing. Some arrived swiftly, wishing to get in the new queen's good graces before others. Others held back, uncertain or openly disapproving. Lady Sansa Stark sent a raven acknowledging Daenerys' ascension, though she did not come south. She voiced concerns about the North's autonomy, as expected, and negotiations began via letters. Yara Greyjoy arrived in person, pledging the Iron Islands support, recalling the time Daenerys had once promised to give them independence in exchange for her loyalty. Gendry Baratheon rode in from Storm's End, unsure of his standing in this new regime but greeting Daenerys with respect, acknowledging that House Baratheon owed much to Targaryen roots. A council formed, a swirl of alliances and discussions that filled the halls of the Red Keep with new life. Amid these politickings, Cersei Lannister remained confined. A formal trial was scheduled. Daenerys intended to make a show of it, an open hearing with charges read so that the realm could see justice done. Tyrion and Jaime both wrestled with their loyalties. Tyrion believed Cersei deserved to answer for her crimes, yet he still felt a pang of love for the sister who had tried to kill him more than once. Jaime was tormented, wanting to save Cersei from a brutal end but also knowing that she had crossed too many lines to walk away unscathed. The day of the trial arrived. Daenerys presided from the Iron Throne, flanked by Tyrion as her hand. The hall was crowded with onlookers, lords, ladies, soldiers, and curious citizens who managed to slip in. Cersei stood before them, dressed in plain black, her posture that of a once proud ruler now stripped of all illusions. She listened impassively as the charges were read: regicide, mass murder via wildfire in the September of Baelor, betrayal of alliances, and more. Evidence was presented, witnesses spoke. The combined weight of her crimes was immense. Cersei offered little defense other than to say she had done what she believed necessary to protect her children and preserve her power. She admitted to the destruction of the Great September, to the forging of alliances with those who opposed Daenerys, and to the sabotage of peace talks. But she did not plead for her life. She stood with head high, delivering the barest acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The spectators watched, many grimacing or cursing as they heard the recounting of her deeds. Daenerys's voice was steady when she delivered her judgment. You have committed crimes against the realm, crimes that led to the deaths of innocents. You claim you acted for your children, but your actions stained the realm in blood and fear. By right, your life is forfeit. She paused, scanning Cersei's face. Yet you surrendered the city, and by doing so, you saved thousands. Do I reward that one act of grace, or do I condemn you for all your crimes? Tyrion, tense beside her, spoke softly. Your grace, the realm has seen enough death. Let this not be the day we repeat old patterns. Daenerys recalled how Missandei had once encouraged her to seek mercy when it was right. She exhaled. Cersei Lannister, I sentence you to a life of exile. You shall be taken to the Silent Sisters, there to serve penance for the remainder of your days in silent contemplation of your crimes. You will never again wield power in the Seven Kingdoms. Should you attempt to escape or plot further treachery, your life is forfeit. A murmur swept the hall. Exile, not execution. It was far more merciful than many had anticipated. Some cried out that she deserved death. Others whispered that perhaps the new queen was too lenient. Jaime, standing near the dais, let out a breath of relief. Even he, who loved Cersei in his own twisted way, seemed surprised that she had been spared. Cersei herself was silent, her face devoid of expression. Perhaps relief flickered in her eyes, or perhaps it was resignation. She inclined her head in a small bow. And so Cersei was led away, not to the dungeon, but to a waiting carriage that would bear her to a distant Septri. There she would have no voice, no power, no illusions of grandeur. Jaime elected to follow her, to join the order and look after her, or at least to ensure she was not alone in her final years. The realm was left to consider the significance of this act. Daenerys Targaryen, a queen once driven by vengeance, had chosen to spare her greatest enemy. Some saw it as strength. Others saw it as a dangerous softness. Yet, for the time being, the city endured in peace. Daenerys's hold on King's Landing strengthened each day. She reorganized the small council, placing Tyrion as hand, Ser Davos as master of ships, and, for the moment, she named no master of whispers, wary after the betrayals that had nearly undone her. The city began to rebuild. Daenerys poured resources into clearing rubble, rebuilding homes, ensuring that bread and porridge reached the poorest districts. The Red Keep bustled with new life, the halls no longer echoing with the threat of violence. Drogon, however, remained a constant reminder of the Queen's might. He perched on the battlements or soared across the skies, keeping watch. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys traveled to Highgarden, forging alliances with the Lords of the Reach who had turned against Cersei. She visited Storm's End, meeting with Gendry to solidify the Baratheon line's loyalty. Word came from the Iron Islands that Yara was stamping out any remaining followers of Euron. Across the continent, an uneasy peace settled, with many lords choosing to bend the knee rather than face the might of Dragonfire. Yet Daenerys used that might sparingly. She made an example of a few rebellious holdouts who refused to cease harassing neighboring territories, but she stopped short of wholesale destruction. Over time, King's Landing shed the gloom of war. Markets bustled again, streets filled with people bartering and living. Children ran through alleyways, chasing each other with wooden swords. The Great Hall saw visitors from across the narrow sea, from Dorne to the north, each curious about the new queen who had arrived so dramatically and yet had chosen mercy over annihilation. Some praised her. Others doubted her. But none could deny that her path was different from what they had feared. Jon Snow, ever the honorable presence, found himself drifting between the North and King's Landing, working to maintain a fragile alliance. He and Daenerys spoke often, sharing quiet moments in gardens or on palace balconies, discussing the future of Westeros. The question of the North's independence remained, but it no longer simmered with hostility. They agreed to revisit the matter once the realm was truly stable. For now, Sansa remained Lady of Winterfell, ruling effectively while the new queen focused on healing the ravaged south. The old grudges still lingered, but they did not erupt into fresh conflict. For the first time in a long while, the realm had a chance to breathe. Time continued its march and Daenerys grew into her role. She learned to navigate the labyrinth of court life, to decipher the ambitions of lesser lords, and to quell the lingering factions that yearned for chaos. She welcomed men and women of various backgrounds into her service, forging a new generation of advisors. Tyrion, with his wit and cunning, proved indispensable. Ser Davos's plain-spoken honesty was a balm in a world of intrigue. Grey Worm oversaw the Unsullied with unwavering loyalty, though his pain over Missandei's death never left him. Meanwhile, Cersei's name faded from daily conversation, replaced by rumors of her quiet existence in a distant Septri. Jaime's letters occasionally reached Tyrion, indicating that both he and Cersei lived in austere conditions, that her belly had grown heavy with child, and that she toiled in silence. Jaime's own guilt weighed heavily, and whether he truly believed in redemption, he did not say. The realm had moved on, leaving Cersei Lannister in the dust of history. In the third year of Daenerys' reign, King's Landing was a city transformed. The scars of war had been largely mended, though some ruins remained as a testament to the fragility of peace. Daenerys herself walked through the city wearing a cloak to hide her identity, as she did from time to time, witnessing a measure of contentment among the people. There were new houses, new taverns, children who had only ever known a Targaryen queen. She thought back to the day she arrived at King's Landing, expecting a pitched battle, her heart heavy with rage and grief. Instead, she had received the keys to the city. That single choice, that turn of fate, had changed everything. She paused at a small fountain in a modest square where a group of children played. A half-blind old woman sat on a bench, her voice a weathered croak as she recounted to the children the story of how the Dragon Queen had come to the city. She flew in on a great beast, the woman intoned dramatically, and the bells tolled, and Queen Cersei laid down her arms, sparing us from the fires. And that is how the reign of dragons returned to King's Landing without the city's doom. The children listened with wide eyes, enthralled. Daenerys allowed herself a small, sad smile. The real story was more complicated, of course. But the gist was there. Cersei's surrender had saved countless lives. She had not finished her reign through an inferno, but through a bow of the head. That single choice had shaped the present in ways Daenerys could scarcely believe. A tug on her cloak startled her. A young girl with a dirt-smudged face looked up at her. "Are you the Dragon Queen?" she asked in a timid voice, her large brown eyes curious. She had probably seen glimpses of Daenerys' face around the city or on coins minted with her likeness. Daenerys knelt, smiling gently. "I am," she said softly. "But let's keep that between us, shall we?" She pressed a copper coin into the girl's small palm. The girl stared at it in awe, then grinned, flashing a gap-toothed smile. She nodded vigorously before scampering back to her friends. Standing, Daenerys felt a curious warmth. Long ago, she had imagined her arrival in Westeros would be triumphant but bloody. Instead, it had been simultaneously anticlimactic and miraculous. Cersei's surrender had frustrated her thirst for vengeance at the time, but now she saw how it had averted a horror that would have stained her reign forever. She had been spared the guilt of burning a city to the ground, and while she had not forgotten or forgiven the pain Cersei had inflicted, she understood that sometimes the realm's future demanded that personal grudges yield to mercy. She turned her steps back toward the Red Keep, her guard trailing, hidden among the crowd. Overhead, Drogon soared in lazy circles, a silhouette against the midday sun, ever watchful. The city bustled, vibrant. Shopkeepers peddled wares, street performers played music. Life thrived beneath the Targaryen banner. For all the struggles, for all the heartbreak, Daenerys felt a cautious pride. She was no saint, and she had made and would continue to make difficult choices. But King's Landing was hers, and it was alive. As she crossed the threshold into the Red Keep, the echoes of footsteps on stone welcomed her home. Grey Worm saluted. Tyrion waited in the corridor, a fresh bundle of letters in hand, ever the busy hand of the queen. He gave her a quick update on border disputes, the logistics of harbor tariffs, the negotiations with Dorne. She listened with measured interest, her mind already turning to the next steps. The wheel kept turning, and it was her duty to guide it toward stability. Yet, despite the unceasing responsibilities, she could not help but recall the sight of that old woman by the fountain weaving a story of her arrival. The bells, the surrender, the relief of a city spared from the flames. If she had unleashed Drogon, if she had allowed her rage and grief to dictate her actions, countless innocent lives would have been lost. The cycle of violence might have continued, leaving a bitter memory of the Dragon Queen as another tyrant. Instead, she had a chance to forge something better. And that was all she had ever truly wanted. When she entered her private chambers, Daenerys removed her cloak and gazed out the window at the city sprawling below. She recalled the moment she first saw the gates of King's Landing flung open, Jaime Lannister and Brienne standing in parley, bells tolling a peaceful surrender. It had felt surreal, almost like a trick, but it had been real enough. And in that moment, two queens had faced each other, one stepping aside, the other ascending to power. That moment had set the course of history. Daenerys closed her eyes. She could still hear the echo of those bells in her mind, the hush that fell over the troops, the unspoken question of what happens next. She remembered the tension in every line of Grey Worm's posture, the guarded hope in Tyrion's eyes, the uncertainty in Jon's. She remembered her own chest tightening with the weight of making the right choice. That choice had not undone the tragedies of the past, nor had it cleansed away the heartbreak she had endured. But it had opened a path forward, one that allowed her to be a queen in truth, not just in name. Years from now, bards would sing of the day the city bells tolled not for death but for deliverance, when the last Lannister queen surrendered to the Mother of Dragons, allowing the realm an unthinkable reprieve from devastation. They would speak of Daenerys Targaryen, the Dragon Queen who took the Iron Throne without a final, catastrophic battle, forging a fragile but precious peace. In that peace, the seeds of a better Westeros were sown. And though many challenges remained, it was enough for now to know that a single moment of surrender had changed the course of history, sparing thousands of lives and granting Daenerys the chance to truly become the breaker of chains she had once promised to be. She let the memory of the bells wash over her, exhaling a soft breath. There was work to be done, always. But the city breathed and the realm shifted toward a calmer horizon. Perhaps that was all any ruler could hope for, a chance to break the cycles of vengeance and violence and to light a way for those who came after. She would rise to the challenge. She had to. And in the silent halls of a distant Septri, the woman who had once been queen walked in quiet circles, counting regrets. Fate had spared them from each other's final wrath. And in that sparing, a new chapter for the Seven Kingdoms had begun. In the months that followed, King's Landing gradually settled into its newest identity, a capital under Targaryen rule. From the tallest spires of the Red Keep to the most unremarkable alleys of Flea Bottom, Daenerys's presence was felt in every policy, every public decree, and every subtle shift in power. The City Watch, newly restructured, continued to patrol the streets with an impartiality most of the inhabitants had never known. In taverns and market stalls, the talk was filled with equal parts relief, apprehension, and grudging optimism. Some believed this new queen represented the dawn of genuine mercy for a city that had known too many tyrants. Others muttered that it was only a matter of time before the dragon burned them all. Yet as weeks gave way to months, no fires raged. Instead, wagons carrying grain trundled in under the banners of the crown, distributing rations to the poorest districts. Thieves who were caught rarely found themselves mutilated or executed. They often ended up laboring on public works, cleaning rubble, or helping rebuild scorched neighborhoods. Amid these changes, many folk began to wonder if perhaps the Targaryen queen was not the monster they had feared. Inside the Red Keep itself, the atmosphere was one of constant negotiation. Daenerys had assumed the throne with a startling absence of bloodshed, but the real challenge lay in unifying the realm behind her. To that end, Tyrion spent long days drafting letters, reviewing city records, and conferring with newly arrived courtiers. Gendry Baratheon moved into a suite of rooms in the keep so that Storm's End would maintain a presence at court, though he frequently rode back to his lordship in the Stormlands to see to practical concerns. The once crippled shipping lanes along the coast needed fortification, and Gendry, still learning how to be a proper lord, found himself juggling responsibilities he never imagined inheriting. He was grateful for the Red Keep's stable of advisors, especially Ser Davos, who took a liking to the young Baratheon and offered guidance on matters of trade and administration. Yara Greyjoy's presence caused ripples of curiosity. She had arrived in a sleek Iron-born longship, its hull scarred from past raids, her distinctive short hair and pragmatic leathers in sharp contrast to the silks and velvets of the Red Keep's corridors. She had no love for King's Landing, nor a great fondness for kneeling, but her loyalty to Daenerys, forged back when Euron still prowled the seas, remained firm. She spent her days conferring with the Queen's master of ships, Ser Davos, on how best to integrate the Iron Fleet's strength into the Crown's naval strategy. Already, Yara had begun stamping out the last vestiges of her uncle's supporters in the Iron Islands, but she knew her people would never accept strict subservience to the mainland. Daenerys understood that as well. They spent hours hammering out a compromise in which the Iron Islands would retain a high degree of autonomy if they pledged not to engage in further raids against the Westerosi coasts. The negotiations were tense, sometimes rancorous, but by the end, a new understanding, if not exactly friendship, was forged. Yara left the Red Keep for Pike in a battered, sea-worn vessel, a small Targaryen pendant tucked into her belt, an emblem of a promise, if not a binding vow. Meanwhile, Jon Snow moved like a man caught between two worlds. He spent as much time as he could in the north, tending to the concerns of Winterfell and conferring with Sansa. Their letters flew back and forth with anxious regularity. Some days, Jon seemed resolved to help Daenerys govern the Seven Kingdoms from the heart of King's Landing. Other days, he would vanish on the King's Road and ride north to oversee matters personally, checking on the Night's Watch or dealing with disputes among the Northern Bannermen who questioned his continued loyalty to a foreign queen. Through it all, he maintained an uneasy balance, reaffirming that peace with Daenerys was better than war for everyone. Sansa, in her missives, remained polite but wary toward Daenerys, her memories of their earlier tensions still fresh. Often, Jon found himself repeating the same refrain, "We cannot afford another fracture." The realm needs unity if only to recover from the long, dreadful wars that had nearly broken it. Within the Red Keep, Jon's presence gave Daenerys a sense of relief she seldom voiced aloud. She recalled how they had stood side by side against the army of the dead and how he had bent the knee in the name of a better future. War had changed them both, etched sorrow into their faces and doubt into their hearts. Yet the harshness of her earlier rage had softened. She recognized in Jon a kindred spirit haunted by responsibilities. When they dined together, they often spoke of logistics, grain counts, the reorganization of the city watch, trade pacts with Essos, but occasionally, after the torches were extinguished in the Great Hall and only a few candles burned, their conversation would drift to memories of simpler times. She would speak of her childhood in exile, how Viserys used to tell her outlandish stories of the Red Keep while they shivered in cramped hovels. Jon would talk of his youth at Winterfell, standing on the periphery as a bastard, remembering how he yearned for acceptance. These quiet moments formed the delicate threads of something approaching companionship, if not the ardent bond of lovers they once threatened to become. The revelations of Jon's parentage, that he was, in truth, Aegon Targaryen, had once caused a storm of confusion. But now, in the hush of these late-night talks, that fact lay dormant, an awkward truth neither quite knew how to confront. For the good of the realm, Jon kept it hidden. For the good of the realm, Daenerys let it lie. Beyond the capital, word of Daenerys's reign spread across the Seven Kingdoms. From the Vale came Lord Robin Arryn, taller now and somewhat less sickly, though still plagued by bouts of petulance and an over-reliance on his advisors. He arrived with a modest retinue, wide-eyed at the city's teeming streets. He attempted to curry favor with the queen by showering her with the Vale's produce, cheeses, salted meats, crates of fruit. Daenerys accepted the gifts with regal grace but refused to let her policies be steered by shallow flattery. The men of the Vale, she declared, were welcome to remain in the city as part of a rotating guard that would help keep the peace. She intended to use the armies of various houses to watch each other, ensuring no single force could plot rebellion unobserved. It was a delicate dance, orchestrated by Tyrion, who had the mind for such intricacies. He spent hours in the council chambers juggling the interplay of alliances and mutual suspicion, remembering the many lessons learned under Tywin Lannister. This time, he vowed, he would use those lessons to preserve peace, not to set the realm on fire. From Dorne arrived a delegation led by a young woman who introduced herself as Sarella of House Martell, a cousin of the late Prince Doran and Princess Aryan. Many in the throne room stared, for the direct line of the Martells had been decimated in the wars. Oberyn was long dead, as were Illyria and her daughters, lost to Cersei's vengeful prisons. Dorne had been silent for some time, simmering in its own fury. Yet here stood Sarella, olive-skinned and proud, accompanied by a small retinue of Dornish knights. She bore a letter sealed with the Martell sun and spear, demanding autonomy and respect in any new governance. As if to underscore the point, she wore a desert-colored cloak pinned with a golden brooch shaped like a spear. Daenerys received them with courtesy. Over cups of strong Dornish wine, Sarella explained that her people did not trust the Iron Throne, not after the deaths of Elia Martell and her children, not after centuries of uneasy relations with Targaryens and Baratheons alike. Daenerys, though, listened carefully, well aware of Dornish pride and the region's strategic importance. At the end of a tense negotiation, they reached an agreement that guaranteed Dorne would enjoy tax privileges and partial self-governance, enough to placate the proud Dornish while acknowledging the Iron Throne's overlordship. It was no small feat. Tyrion declared it a triumph of diplomacy. Sarella returned to Sunspear with a renewed sense that perhaps this Targaryen queen, with her talk of rebuilding rather than conquering, was different. Inside the city, the process of reconstruction continued at a steady pace. Funds poured in from confiscated Lannister assets, especially from the wealth that had once been hoarded under Cersei's reign. The Tyrell gold in the Red Keep's vaults also provided a foundation for paying laborers who cleared debris, restored battered buildings, and reopened the capital's neglected infrastructure. The The Street of Flour, once starved under siege, now bustled with bakers who found themselves able to purchase grain at fair prices. The Street of Steel rang again with the hammering of blacksmiths producing everything from horseshoes to fine swords. Rumors said that the city was teetering on the edge of a renaissance, that if the realm remained stable, King's Landing might become the greatest metropolis in Westeros. Daenerys wanted that more than anything, believing that if the capital was strong and prosperous, the rest of the realm would follow. Amidst all these changes, a persistent question lingered in many minds. What would become of House Lannister now that its most famous members were scattered or disgraced? Jaime had escorted Cersei to the Septri, where she had given birth to a daughter and then taken the vows of silence alongside the Silent Sisters. Jaime's letters, sporadic at best, suggested that the child lived and breathed but would be raised in the austere shadow of that devout order. Whether or not the child would claim the Lannister name one day remained uncertain. Jaime seemed torn between wanting to protect his offspring from the toxicity of their lineage and wanting to reclaim some shred of legacy. No one quite knew how to handle the odd limbo of a living child born to a woman who had once been queen but who now spoke no words. Tyrion spoke of it seldom, as it opened old wounds, but occasionally at the painted table, he would stare at Casterly Rock's carved outline and let out a low sigh. House Lannister was not finished, he would muse. The name would carry on, perhaps quietly, perhaps overshadowed by the new regime. But it would endure, and that endurance, he sometimes feared, might one day present a danger if spurred by ambition or resentment. Still, for now, those matters remained remote. The city's day-to-day hum overshadowed grander schemes. The warm seasons brought fresh produce from the Reach, enough to fill markets with colorful fruits and vegetables that the city had rarely seen in such abundance. Traveling merchants arrived from Essos, hoping to sell silk, glass, and exotic spices to a populace that, while not exactly wealthy, at least possessed some coin once again. Ser Davos took pride in forging maritime connections, so that Braavosi ships could dock in King's Landing and offload goods for fair tariffs, rather than the punishing duties that had once weighed upon the city under incompetent or greedy rulers. Now, each day the harbor bustled with new flags, new faces, new sounds, weaving King's Landing into a broader tapestry of trade that had long eluded it. In the Red Keep's highest chambers, Daenerys spent hours each day holding court. She heard petitions from commoners who traveled days to seek the Queen's justice. She listened to the pleas of minor lords who claimed their lands had been ravaged by bandits. She considered proposals from Braavosi bankers and envoys from Pentos eager to establish a consulate in the city. Occasionally she would descend from the throne, greeting petitioners face-to-face rather than lording above them. These gestures endeared her to some, though others whispered that it was unbecoming for a monarch to show such personal interest. Daenerys paid those whispers little mind. She remembered her time in Essos, seeing how the leaders there lived distant and aloof while the people suffered. She vowed not to repeat that mistake. If humility kept her closer to the realm's heartbeat, she would wield it as surely as she wielded any crown. Yet ruling was never easy. Each day brought new challenges. After the wars, roving brigands still harassed the countryside. The crown struggled to rein in mercenaries once loyal to Cersei, or to the Freys, or to lesser houses no longer recognized in the new order. Tyrion proposed using the Unsullied as a roving peacekeeping force, but Grey Worm bristled at the idea of scattering his disciplined soldiers across the realm. They were trained for open battle, not the subtlety of chasing down scattered bandits. Jon Snow suggested calling upon the newly reformed royal army, made up of men from multiple regions, so that no single faction held the upper hand. Daenerys agreed, though she insisted that any men enlisted in that force receive decent pay, equipment, and oversight. She had no wish to create another gold cloak arrangement, rife with corruption. The plan was slow to take shape, but over time, squads of well-trained soldiers wearing the Targaryen sigil spread across the crownlands, hunting brigands and restoring order. They encountered pockets of resistance, from leftover supporters of House Baratheon who refused to acknowledge Gendry's legitimacy, or from hedge knights who saw no profit in a stable realm. Violence flared in isolated corners of the Reach and the Riverlands. But month by month, the incidents grew fewer, and some measure of normalcy returned to towns that had been ravaged by the War of the Five Kings. One unexpected challenge emerged in the form of the faith. While many septs had been destroyed or damaged during Cersei's reign, the populace remained devout, clinging to the faith of the Seven as a source of comfort. After Cersei's destruction of the Great September of Baelor, a deep distrust had sprung up between the common folk and the ruling powers. Although Daenerys had no direct hand in that atrocity, some wondered whether a Targaryen child of the Mad King might prove as callous toward religious institutions. Daenerys responded by commissioning the rebuilding of a grand sept in King's Landing, dedicated not only to the Seven but also to the memory of all those who had perished in the wars. She invited the High Septon from Old Town to oversee the project, providing him with a seat on her council to advise on matters of faith. This gesture did much to ease tensions, though it also opened the door for more entanglements. The High Septon inevitably pushed for laws that aligned with the doctrine of the faith, including limitations on certain freedoms that Daenerys, having come from Essos, found archaic. She resisted harshly punitive stances on vices like prostitution, recalling how she had once walked among the brothels of Meereen without shame. Yet the faith argued that the city would never be truly moral until such sins were stamped out. A delicate balance arose. Daenerys permitted moderate reforms, ensuring a better standard of living for the impoverished, but she refused to enact draconian measures. The High Septon grumbled, but he remained in King's Landing, placated for the moment by the Queen's willingness to treat the faith with respect rather than contempt. Amid these administrative battles, life in the Red Keep continued apace. Courtly intrigues blossomed. Dances were held in the refurbished throne room, the marble floors shining in torchlight, minstrels plucking strings to liven the air. Wine flowed, lords from every corner of Westeros exchanging gossip in huddled corners. Daenerys attended some of these soirees, though she found them tedious. She preferred direct conversation or purposeful gatherings to the frivolity of endless dancing and idle chatter. Still, she recognized the need to be seen, to show her face among the nobility, if only to dispel the notion that she was some foreign savage perched on the Iron Throne. Many nights ended quietly in the Queen's chambers, where she would stand by a tall window overlooking the city's rooftops, the thousands of pinprick lights gleaming below. Often she found herself thinking of those she had lost, Jorah Mormont, Missandei, her dragons Viserion and Regal. Their absence still weighed upon her. Drogon, the last living symbol of her power, occasionally settled on one of the city's tall towers, his immense silhouette cast by moonlight. She would watch him from her window, a silent vigil that reminded her of the price she had paid for the throne. On particularly restless nights, she would descend into the courtyard and climb onto Drogon's back, riding into the sky above the sleeping city, letting the rush of wind and the roar of flames cleanse her of the day's burdens. Sometimes, the watchers on the city walls gazed in wonder at the Queen silhouetted against the moon, her dragon's beating wings echoing over the rooftops. Such sights fueled 1,000 ballads. The children of Flea Bottom whispered stories of the Dragon Queen who soared under starlight, protecting them from nightmares. Old men in taverns shook their heads, recalling the last time a Targaryen had flown so freely over the realm. Yet no pillars of flame scorched the city below, and that alone lent credence to the idea that her reign might not be so terrible after all. In her 3rd year on the throne, Daenerys received word that House Tully, long overshadowed by the conflicts in the Riverlands, had fully recovered Riverrun. Edmure Tully, once a prisoner of the Freys, had finally reclaimed his ancestral seat. He dispatched a letter expressing loyalty to the Iron Throne, albeit with some reservations about the taxes demanded by the crown. Daenerys, in consultation with Tyrion, negotiated a fair arrangement. The Tully letter also carried news of Walder Frey's scattered brood. Though most of the Frey family line had collapsed, pockets of them still lurked in the Riverlands, resentful of Tully restoration. The letter warned that tensions might flare if the crown did not take care to police the region. In response, Daenerys agreed to station a few detachments of the royal army near key crossroads, ensuring that traveling merchants and common folk alike could pass without fear of ambush. The Riverlands had seen too much blood. She intended to restore stability no matter how many soldiers it required. In the north, Sansa Stark continued her quiet but firm governance. She refused every invitation to come south, citing pressing needs in Winterfell, from tending the harvest to fortifying the region's defenses. Jon rode there often, sometimes returning with cryptic statements about northern independence. The memory of the Great War with the dead, the countless fallen in the long night, was still fresh in northern minds. They did not relish kneeling to another southern ruler, even one who had fought valiantly at Winterfell's side. To keep the peace, Daenerys allowed them a broad measure of autonomy, hoping that good faith gestures would win trust. She did not push for northern taxes beyond a token sum. She allowed the North to maintain its own local laws so long as they did not contradict the basic tenets of the realm's justice. She sent gifts to Sansa, fine cloth, southern delicacies, only to receive polite but cautious acknowledgments. Gradually, the trade routes between Winterfell and King's Landing reopened, carrying grain, furs, and salted fish south, while wagons of steel and produce journeyed north. Over time, a steady commerce developed, bridging the gap little by little. The northern lords, though grudging, recognized the benefit of stable trade in these post-war years. The harshest winters demanded reliable supply lines. Their defiance softened, though no one claimed the North would ever truly kneel. Tyrion told Daenerys not to worry, remarking that the North had always been half an independent kingdom. If they were not rebelling, that was as close to acceptance as the Starks would give. It was in the spring of the 4th year of Daenerys' reign that an unexpected visitor arrived at King's Landing under cover of night. Arya Stark returned from her wanderings. She appeared at the gates with only a single companion, a tall, silent figure whose identity was unclear to the guards. The moment word reached the Red Keep, Jon Snow hurried to meet her in the courtyard. Arya was older, leaner, with eyes that held a quiet confidence. She had traveled across the narrow sea and back, from Braavos to the outer edges of Westeros, forging her own path. Yet here she was, reappearing like a wraith. She embraced Jon and asked for a private audience with the Queen. Daenerys, curious and mindful of the young Stark's reputation, granted her request. They met in a modest council chamber rather than the throne room. Arya entered, scanning the space with that quicksilver gaze. Daenerys recognized at once that this was no ordinary northern girl. The rumors of how Arya had dispatched House Frey's killers or the role she played in the final downfall of Littlefinger lingered in half-whispered stories. Daenerys invited her to speak freely. Arya said little about her travels. She simply stated that she had returned to Westeros to see how her family fared, and that she wished to confirm rumors that Daenerys was indeed ruling with something resembling mercy. Her tone was neither deferential nor challenging, just calm, factual. She asked pointed questions about the city's transformation, about the freedmen of Meereen who had come to King's Landing in small numbers to start new lives. Daenerys answered as best she could, describing her efforts to maintain peace. She looked to Jon for clues, but he only shrugged slightly, as puzzled as she was by Arya's motives. Eventually, Arya revealed that she had come bearing a message from Braavos, from the bank itself. The Iron Bank, it seemed, had observed the shift in power. Though it had once backed Cersei, it now saw the Targaryen Queen's realm as a potential partner. The bank proposed a favorable line of credit if Daenerys would sponsor certain Braavosi ventures in Westeros, expanding trade, building new ports, and investing in roads. Arya handed over a sealed missive from a Braavosi banker she had befriended. It did not specify how she had come by the letter, nor why she was trusted to deliver it. Daenerys did not pry too deeply. She sensed that Arya, with her quiet, lethal grace, could hold her own secrets. What mattered was the potential alliance with the Iron Bank. Tyrion was thrilled, seeing it as an opportunity to invest in roads, sewers, aqueducts, and port expansions that would further solidify the realm's stability. Daenerys gave it careful thought, mindful that the Iron Bank could be a fickle ally. Still, forging better connections with the richest financial institution in the known world could accelerate her plans to rebuild Westeros from within, so she accepted the invitation to negotiate. Arya stayed a few more days in the capital, though she remained mostly on the periphery, content to explore the city in the anonymity of a hooded cloak. More than once, the guards reported glimpses of her scaling rooftops or slipping into narrow alleyways. She came and went like a shadow, leaving Daenerys to wonder about the quiet Stark's deeper motives. Jon tried to reconnect with his sister, but she said little about her personal journey and refused any formal welcome feast. After those few days, she slipped away, heading north again, or perhaps elsewhere. Daenerys never learned exactly what Arya gleaned from her time in the city, only that the young woman departed without rancor and without any farewell beyond a polite nod to the Queen. Jon said it was simply her way. Life in the Red Keep returned to its steady rhythm. Councils, audiences, dinners, and the swirl of courtiers. Lawler worshippers occasionally passed through the city, telling stories of the long night, claiming Daenerys was still chosen by the Lord of Light. Daenerys, recalling the help Melisandre once provided in the war against the dead, did not dismiss them out of hand, but neither did she embrace their creed. She let them preach in the open squares so long as they did not incite violence or sacrilege against the faith of the Seven. The High Septon complained, but she insisted on a measure of tolerance for all faiths, citing her experiences in Essos as a reason not to stamp out beliefs that might bring hope to some. Such was the shape of her rule: constant balancing, constant attempts to find stability amid a realm that had known too little of it for too long. Even as the years continued, Daenerys never fully let her guard down. She remembered how quickly fortunes changed in Westeros. The memory of her father's downfall was seared into the realm's history. She knew that somewhere, old resentments might fester, waiting for a moment of weakness. Yet she also recognized that, if she governed with consistent justice, she could perhaps avert the cycle of vengeance. Each day, she looked out from the Red Keep's high balconies, gazing upon a city that was slowly, painstakingly, becoming prosperous. She saw the hustle of commerce, the clamor of ships, the sprawl of newly built houses around the perimeter as the population grew. She saw children running down the main thoroughfare, weaving around donkey carts piled high with fruit. She heard the clang of blacksmiths forging new tools for farmers. Sometimes she even heard music drifting on the wind, flute players or traveling minstrels singing ballads of the Dragon Queen who rode in without burning the city. These were the subtle signs that her reign was taking root, not through terror, but through the hope of better days. One warm afternoon, as she strolled through the palace gardens, Tyrion found her. He carried a stack of letters under his arm, looking both eager and apprehensive. She sat with him on a stone bench by a newly built fountain. Flowers from across Westeros, roses from Highgarden, bright poppies from Dorne, had been transplanted here, turning the formerly drab courtyard into a mosaic of color. Tyrion set the letters beside him and cleared his throat. He explained that the negotiations with the Iron Bank had succeeded beyond expectation. They were prepared to lend the crown significant capital for large-scale public works. Tyrion rattled off details: new bridges, reinforced roads between key cities, expansions of harbors in King's Landing and Gulltown. Daenerys nodded, pleased. It was the kind of progress she wanted, an investment in the realm's infrastructure that would help everyone, not just the lords. But Tyrion's voice took on a somber note when he added that with these benefits came a subtle danger. The Iron Bank could, at a whim, call in its debts or manipulate trade. If for any reason Daenerys fell out of favor or defaulted on the loans, they might turn their coin to a rival claimant. She had to tread carefully, ensuring the realm's coffers remained strong. Daenerys thought about that risk. She remembered how the Iron Bank once propped up Stannis Baratheon and later extended credit to Cersei. She knew that while she remained on good terms with them, all was well. But alliances in Westeros shifted like sand underfoot. She replied that so long as she governed responsibly, she hoped the bank would see no reason to shift loyalties. Still, a flicker of concern stirred in her mind. It reminded her of an earlier time in Essos when wise men had warned her that gold could be as dangerous as steel in the great game of power. That evening, she brought up the matter to Jon Snow, who had recently returned from a fortnight in Winterfell. Jon listened in his customary quiet way, weighing the prospects of the Iron Bank's involvement. He pointed out that the North, though not wealthy, could provide resources the crown might sell to pay the bank back in time: timber, furs, certain ores from the mountains. He also mentioned that the North was more stable now, with House Mormont rebuilding on Bear Island, House Glover reaffirming its loyalty, and House Serwyn forging new ties with House Stark. Perhaps, he suggested, a well-structured trade agreement between the North and the Crown could help Daenerys remain solvent. She smiled at that, appreciating the synergy. If the realm functioned as one, all would benefit. It was a conversation that, a few years earlier, she would not have imagined having with anyone from the North. Yet here they were, forging a common path. She thanked Jon, and in that moment, she saw a flicker of something like warmth in his eyes. Their bond was complicated, too complicated. But at the very least, trust lingered where once suspicion might have reigned. Outside the capital, rumors swirled of hidden plots. A minor Targaryen pretender appeared in the disputed lands across the narrow sea, calling himself the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, but few took him seriously. Word reached King's Landing that mercenaries once loyal to the Golden Company had flocked to this pretender, seeking to gather coin from gullible sponsors. Tyrion's spies reported that the so-called Black Dragon was nothing more than a cunning sellsword with dyed silver hair, hoping to exploit the faint recollection of Aegon Targaryen's rumored survival. When Daenerys heard these tidings, she snorted at the absurdity. A few years ago, she might have rushed across the sea to quash any potential threat. Now, she recognized that the realm was stable enough that no one would be swayed by such a thin story. Still, she quietly ordered a watch on the situation, remembering that foolish pretenders could still cause harm if allowed to grow unchecked. The seasons moved. The realm shifted. As Daenerys entered the 5th year of her reign, she decided it was time for a grand tourney to celebrate the city's revival. Though her own tastes did not run toward tournaments and feasts, she recognized their power to unify the lords and inspire the common folk. With Tyrion and Jon's counsel, she declared that a royal tourney would be held in the wide fields outside the city walls, featuring jousts, archery contests, melee battles, and feasting. Invitations went out to every corner of Westeros, and as the date drew near, pavilions sprang up on the rolling hills. The city's inns overflowed with knights, hedge knights, squires, and wandering performers. The entire region buzzed with excitement, merchants setting up colorful tents to sell their wares, jugglers and fire eaters entertaining rowdy crowds. To some, it felt like a return to the grand festivals of old before war had cast its long shadow. Daenerys emerged on the first day of the tourney in a stately procession. She rode upon a white mare, wearing riding leathers beneath a cloak embroidered with the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Behind her marched the Unsullied in perfect formation. Jon Snow, in black and gray northern garb, rode slightly behind. Tyrion and Ser Davos rode in a carriage, for Tyrion claimed he had no love for horseback and Davos no skill. Grey Worm and a contingent of her new royal army flanked the procession. The people pressed close along the edges of the route, cheering, waving scraps of cloth. Some had come from as far as Dorne or the Neck to witness the festivities. Children craned their necks to see the queen pass by. Daenerys forced herself to smile, mindful that this event needed to be a celebration, a signal to the realm that better days lay ahead. When they reached the sprawling fields, banners of every hue rippled in the breeze: the wolf's head of House Stark, the kraken of House Greyjoy, the falcon of House Arryn, the fish of House Tully, the golden rose of House Tyrell, the sun and spear of House Martell. The stag of House Baratheon, an emblem Gendry had modified slightly to symbolize the new line, and even the lion of House Lannister, though that banner was displayed in a subdued corner by a handful of loyal retainers who had not followed Jaime into exile. The sight was a living tapestry of Westeros, united at least for this moment under Daenerys' watchful gaze. She could not deny a stirring of pride. The jousts began in earnest. Knights charged down the lists to thunderous applause. Some were minor lords hoping to gain prestige. Others were famed warriors who had seen real battle in the war. Gendry Baratheon donned armor bearing the stag sigil, though hammered in a simpler style than Robert's flamboyant plate. He unhorsed several challengers, revealing a surprising knack for jousting that might have come from his father's blood. Lord Robin Arryn attempted a joust but was unseated embarrassingly in his first tilt, causing scattered laughter among onlookers. The young man dusted himself off, trying to maintain dignity. Yara Greyjoy, uninterested in jousting, participated in the archery contest, firing bolts with a grim efficiency that placed her among the finalists. The crowd roared when she grinned at a foe, her hair blowing across her face, and sank an arrow dead center of the target. Even those who once despised the Ironborn were impressed. As for Daenerys, she presided from a wooden stand draped in crimson and black silks. Tyrion sat beside her, keeping an informal tally of the victors, while Jon and Grey Worm looked on. Daenerys occasionally rose to bestow small honors upon worthy knights, placing ribbons around their arms or awarding them tokens. A band of minstrels played lively tunes during breaks, and vendors hawked ale and sweet pastries. It was, Daenerys realized, a rare moment of pure merriment in a kingdom that had known so much darkness. She allowed herself to enjoy it. This was part of what she had fought for, not just a throne, but a realm that could laugh and celebrate without fear. On the final day of the tourney, the melee took center stage. A wide circle was roped off, and dozens of knights, squires, and sellswords entered, each with blunted weapons. When the horn sounded, they clashed in a chaotic swirl of steel. The crowd roared as alliances were formed and broken within moments. Some fought with skill, others with brute force. Gendry barreled through the fray, toppling men left and right with a warhammer reminiscent of his father's style. Yara Greyjoy took part, though she brandished a curved sword more suited to close-quarters fighting on a ship's deck. She fought with lethal precision, sending 3 men stumbling out of the circle in quick succession. Even Ser Brienne of Tarth, visiting from the north on a mission for Sansa Stark, joined the fray, her imposing figure in gleaming armor cutting down any who challenged her. The crowd loved her, remembering rumors of her loyalty and valiant deeds. Soon, the number of combatants dwindled to a handful. Gendry, Yara, Brienne, a masked Sellsword rumored to be from the Free Cities, and a brawny knight from the Reach. Amid the cheers, Gendry exchanged fierce blows with the Sellsword, who wielded dual short swords with uncanny speed. Nearby, Brienne clashed with Yara. Each thrust parried in a shower of sparks. Eventually, Yara feigned left and pivoted behind Brienne, forcing the taller woman to yield her vantage. But Brienne's strength was too formidable for Yara to overwhelm. In a lightning exchange, Brienne battered Yara's blade aside, forcing her to step beyond the rope. Yara spat out a curse, half amused, half angry, and left the circle to a roar of cheers. Meanwhile, Gendry managed to drive the Sellsword to his knees. The masked fighter tapped out rather than risk a bone-breaking blow. That left only Brienne and Gendry. They circled warily, both breathing hard. The crowd hushed, eager. With a respectful nod, they engaged. Brienne's skill with a long sword was legendary, but Gendry's hammer blows were punishing. Each time she tried to slip inside his guard, he swung that hammer in a wide arc, forcing her back. Dust rose around their boots as they danced across the circle. Several tense exchanges followed, weapons colliding with a clang that made onlookers flinch. Gendry tried to feint low, expecting Brienne to move high, but she guessed his plan, pivoted, and slammed the flat of her blade against his chest armor. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. Her sword tip touched his gorget. The melee was done. Brienne offered Gendry a hand, helping him to his feet to an explosion of applause. Daenerys rose from her seat, smiling genuinely for the final 2. She declared Brienne the victor, awarding her a gilded circlet to mark her triumph. Gendry, though exhausted, wore a grin. He congratulated her, acknowledging that he'd never faced so skilled a knight. Brienne, for her part, inclined her head, seemingly relieved to see that her success did not inspire any bitterness. The crowd erupted into cheers, enjoying a moment that blended the boldness of the new generation with the traditions of the old. After the melee, a grand feast was held under massive pavilions. Tables groaned with roasted boar, capons stuffed with herbs, spiced wine, honey cakes, and more. Torches ringed the area, casting dancing light upon the revelers. Daenerys moved among the guests, accepting their congratulations on a successful tourney. Lords from the Vale toasted her, while Riverland's knights offered small tokens of their devotion. Dorne's emissaries raised cups of fiery Dornish wine, proclaiming that perhaps the Targaryens and Martells were no longer sworn enemies. Even Northerners in attendance admitted the hospitality was impressive, though they complained about the heat. Musicians played until well after midnight, fiddles and drums mingling with the chatter of 1,000 voices. In a quieter section of the pavilion, Jon Snow and Daenerys found a moment to stand side by side, watching the revelers. The tension between them was a subdued hum, neither overt nor entirely gone. They had come so far since the day King's Landing surrendered. Jon murmured that the tourney was proof that people could still find joy even after everything they had endured. Daenerys nodded, remarking that she hoped the realm would continue to heal. They looked at each other then, a brief meeting of eyes that held echoes of what might have been and what still could be. But neither put it into words. Duty and caution held them both, like 2 stones circled by the same current but never quite touching. Eventually, Daenerys excused herself to walk through the aisles, letting Jon mingle with the Northerners who had come south. She found Tyrion sipping wine at a table laden with half-empty dishes, his gaze drifting over the crowd. He smiled crookedly when she approached. She asked him if he thought the day had been successful. Tyrion bowed his head in a gesture of wry respect and said yes. The realm had seen a spectacle that spoke not of war but of celebration. That alone was a victory. Daenerys agreed, but she cautioned that vigilance remained essential. Tyrion smiled ruefully, admitting that yes, the Game of Thrones never truly ended, even if Daenerys had vowed to break the wheel. When the festivities finally wound down, Daenerys made her way back to the Red Keep under a canopy of stars. The city, still awake with revelers, thronged around the carriage. She looked out at the faces illuminated by torchlight, hearing laughter, music, the clink of cups. Memories of slaver cities in Essos flitted through her mind. How she had marched in with an army of freed slaves, toppling tyrants with fire and blood. It had taken her years to learn that ruling was far more complex than liberating. Now, in Westeros, she wielded not a sword of vengeance but a careful hand of governance. She had been tested, threatened by betrayal, yet the city stood unburnt. Sometimes she marveled at how close she had come to leveling King's Landing in her fury. The thought chilled her whenever she recalled Missandei's last word, Dracarys, echoing on the wind. But Cersei's surrender had shifted the path of fate. As the carriage passed through the torchlit streets, Daenerys closed her eyes and let the grateful cheers wash over her. Tomorrow, she would continue the work of holding everything together. Tonight, she allowed herself a moment of tentative contentment. In the weeks after the tourney, the city buzzed with stories of the feats of arms. Children reenacted the final duel between Brienne and Gendry with sticks, proclaiming themselves knights. The roads outside King's Landing were strewn with departing lords and knights, each returning to their homes with tales of a queen who encouraged festivals rather than demanded subservience through terror. That alone improved Daenerys' standing among the lesser houses. Tyrion insisted they capitalize on this goodwill by sending envoys to keep lines of communication open, forging fresh alliances in corners of the realm that still teetered between loyalty and indifference. Davos took charge of that effort, traveling with the royal banners to personally meet with mayors of smaller towns, bailiffs of distant provinces, sowing trust in the name of the crown. Meanwhile, Yara Greyjoy departed on her ship, carrying the promise of cooperation between the crown and the Iron Islands. She left behind a small cadre of Ironborn who would remain at court, ensuring Yara's voice was heard in matters of naval import. The arrangement was unusual, and Ironborn presence in the heart of the city had been unthinkable for centuries, but Daenerys believed it would foster understanding or at least quell further conflict. Some city dwellers spat at the sight of the Kraken sigil, remembering the raids of old, but Tyrion reminded everyone that bridging these gaps was the key to a stable realm. Gendry also returned to Storm's End, flushed from his successes in the joust and melee. He wrote to Daenerys often, detailing the improvements he planned for the old Baratheon seat, including repairs to the ancient fortress walls and expansions of the fishing docks. He thanked her for supporting his somewhat controversial claim as a legitimized Baratheon. She, in turn, assured him that if he governed justly and served the realm, his house would never lack for favor. The uncertain bastard-turned-lord was steadily growing into his role, and Daenerys felt some satisfaction in helping him find his place. Perhaps House Baratheon would endure anew, this time without the corrosive ambition that had destroyed it in the past. Tyrion reported, with wry amusement, that Lady Sansa had sent a polite note praising the tourney's success. She had refused to attend in person, of course, but the letter was more cordial than any communication thus far. Daenerys recognized the gesture as Sansa's carefully measured concession that the Targaryen queen was no longer a dire threat but a ruler who could be worked with. The letter also mentioned an alliance by marriage was forming between Lady Sansa and a prominent northern lord, presumably to strengthen alliances in the region. Jon neither confirmed nor denied the rumor, but Daenerys noticed a flicker of relief in his eyes. Perhaps he worried Sansa would remain alone, shouldering too many burdens. Now it seemed the North might find stability in a union that consolidated power without sparking further fracturing. As summer waned into autumn, Daenerys resumed her routine in the capital. Each morning began with a briefing from Tyrion or Grey Worm reporting any news of unrest. She met with guild representatives to discuss trade, with the High Septon to ensure the new sept construction was on schedule, with stewards to oversee the distribution of funds for public works. She convened war councils less frequently now, for there were no pressing threats aside from scattered outlaws. Drogon remained perched on the old dragon pit, a watchful guardian over the city, though he often took to the skies for hunts in the surrounding countryside. Daenerys ensured that any hunts he undertook did not encroach on farmland. She remembered how easily a dragon could be seen as a terror rather than a symbol of protection. One afternoon, as she was concluding a meeting about the city's water supply, Jon approached her with a folded parchment. He looked uncharacteristically tense. The parchment bore the sigil of House Arryn. Daenerys opened it, reading swiftly. The letter reported that Lord Robin Arryn, still smarting from his poor performance at the tourney, had succumbed to a lingering illness in the Eyrie. Rumors suggested foul play. The Vale was in uproar, uncertain who would lead now that the nominal head of House Arryn was dead. The letter asked for the Queen's guidance or intervention to preserve stability in the region. Daenerys sighed, realizing how quickly chaos could sprout when leadership was absent. Robin had been frail, it was true, but she had not expected his death so soon. She looked at Jon, who shrugged, lips pressed tight. Without a direct heir, the Vale might plunge into a succession crisis, with multiple distant cousins vying for power. Daenerys decided to dispatch Tyrion to the Vale as her representative, accompanied by a small retinue of royal soldiers. She wanted to avoid sending a massive force that could be seen as an occupation, but she needed to ensure no opportunist seized power and destabilized one of the realm's key regions. Tyrion, who had once traveled through the Vale under far less pleasant circumstances, agreed. He left the next day, traveling by coach, mindful that the roads were better now but still not entirely safe. She wished him luck, instructing him to keep bloodshed to a minimum and to install a regent or caretaker who would rule with fairness until a new Arryn heir could be determined. Tyrion nodded, though a flicker of apprehension crossed his face. The Vale was famously closed off and proud. He would need every ounce of diplomacy he possessed. In Tyrion's absence, Daenerys carried on, flanked by Ser Davos and Grey Worm. The days bled together in a steady rhythm of governance. At times, she longed to simply ride Drogon beyond the horizon, to breathe free under open skies. But the realm needed her presence, and she had never shied from responsibility. Jon was about to depart for the north again, wanting to visit Sansa to congratulate her on her impending marriage. He invited Daenerys to join him, suggesting that a royal visit might help further mend fences. She considered it, tempted by the idea of seeing the wide northern vistas, perhaps forging a warmer rapport with the Lady of Winterfell. But the memory of her last visit north, with all its tensions and grief, made her hesitate. Ultimately, she decided to remain in King's Landing. Winterfell had found its stability, the capital still required her direct hand. While Jon was away, Daenerys found herself increasingly introspective. She visited the throne room at odd hours, standing before the Iron Throne in silence. Sometimes she would run her fingers along the jagged edges of the swords fused into that imposing seat, remembering how she first approached it when Cersei surrendered, that odd hush in the air, the crown in her hands. Now, the city recognized her as queen, some grudgingly, some gladly, but she had done what once seemed impossible, seized the throne without turning King's Landing into a pyre. That moment, that surrender, had proved that victory could arrive through a single choice that changed the course of history. Her father's madness had nearly burned the realm. She had walked a razor's edge, but she had not repeated his sins. For that, she allowed herself a measure of pride, even if it was mingled with regret for all she had lost. Weeks later, Tyrion returned from the Vale, looking exhausted but successful. He reported that a distant cousin of the Arryn line had emerged, a mild-tempered youth named Harold Harding, who had some claim through the female line. Tyrion brokered a deal whereby Harding would serve as regent until a clearer heir could be determined, or until he was old enough to prove himself a competent lord. The Vale's lords, though fractious, had accepted this arrangement under the weight of the crown's authority. Tyrion confessed that he loathed the politics of the Vale, their stony pride, their suspicion of outsiders, but he believed he had secured stability there. Daenerys thanked him, relieved. Another crisis averted, at least for now. The year rolled on. As autumn deepened, the leaves around King's Landing turned to gold and russet, a vivid show of color rarely seen so far south. The city's population continued to grow, drawing laborers, merchants, and craftsmen from across the realm, attracted by rumors of work and opportunity. Daenerys oversaw the formation of new city wards, ensuring that houses were not built in dangerous floodplains or stacked atop each other in fire-prone clusters. The City Watch expanded, trained by a mix of unsullied officers and seasoned Westerosi veterans, aiming to create a disciplined force that answered directly to the crown. Reports of petty crime persisted. No city was without vice, but the days of lawless anarchy seemed distant. Flea Bottom remained an impoverished district, but even there, breadlines sponsored by the Queen prevented the worst hunger. Street children told stories of the silver-haired queen who once wandered in their midst, distributing coins. Whether true or embellished, these tales gradually shaped a narrative of Daenerys as a monarch of curious compassion. She neither encouraged nor denied such legends. Let them think what they would, so long as it kept them from fear. From time to time, news drifted in about Cersei and Jaime in their secluded septri. According to letters from Jaime, the child born to Cersei was a girl with golden hair who had learned to walk among the silent stone halls. Jaime described how he labored in menial tasks, devoting himself to the Seven in an attempt to atone for his sins. He spoke of Cersei's silence, the vow she had taken as part of her sentence. Whether it was true penance or simply resignation, he could not say. The letters carried a faint undertone of sorrow, as though Jaime was a man who had glimpsed redemption but was never sure he deserved it. Daenerys read these updates with a complicated mix of relief and pity. She allowed the letters to pass through unimpeded. The once feared Queen of the Seven Kingdoms was now a quiet figure in a lonely septri, her line reduced to a single child who might never claim the Lannister name. Some might have called it too lenient a fate. Others might see it as a kindness for the realm that she was kept away from politics. Either way, Daenerys had no regrets. If anything, it proved that she had spared the city from a final catastrophic bloodbath. The wheel had turned and the realm had survived. That winter, mild in the south but brutal in the north, marked the end of Daenerys' 5th year on the throne. Jon Snow once again returned to King's Landing, bringing news that Sansa had married a northern lord from an ancient but lesser-known house, cementing alliances across the region. Winterfell was, by all accounts, thriving. Jon seemed in better spirits than before, remarking that the north was enjoying the quiet, focusing on rebuilding after the Night King's devastation. He stayed in the capital through the coldest months, assisting Daenerys as she prepared for the next season of planting and resource allocation. Though their interactions remained formal in council settings, Daenerys found comfort in his presence. They had fought and bled together. She trusted Jon in a way that did not come easily with most. Late in the evening, they sometimes took long walks along the battlements, discussing everything from the possibilities of farmland expansion in the Crownlands to the vague sense of emptiness that still haunted them both. Once, on a particularly clear night, they climbed to the top of the old Maegor's Holdfast Tower, gazing at the stars. Daenerys remembered doing something similar in Essos with Missandei and Grey Worm. For a moment, she was struck by how life had woven new alliances and undone old ones, forging a tapestry she never could have predicted. As the days crept towards spring again, Daenerys surveyed her city and realized that the transformation was not just physical but also spiritual. The people looked to the Red Keep and saw a queen who had not raised the city, who had spared them from the worst horrors of war. They saw an administration determined to restore prosperity. They saw roads being built, aqueducts repaired, bread distributed in times of scarcity. They also saw an imposing dragon perched above, a reminder of what could happen if they rebelled, but for now, that dragon was a guardian more than a threat. Through it all, Daenerys understood that she ruled by the consent of her people as much as by raw power. If she failed them, if she lapsed into tyranny, they would revolt. She intended never to give them cause. Beyond King's Landing, the rest of Westeros also adjusted to the new normal. The Targaryen sigil flew beside the banners of each region, signifying a unity that had long eluded the realm. A few minor rebellions flared in remote areas, but they were quelled without widespread bloodshed. Houses that once bent the knee to the Lannisters found themselves grudgingly acknowledging a Targaryen on the throne. Tales of the Mad King still lingered, fueling suspicion, but each peaceful harvest that came and went eroded those fears. Letters and ravens flew back and forth, announcing births, marriages, the passing of older lords, the ascent of new heirs, mundane markers of a realm no longer at war. Still, Daenerys never let herself forget that all of it hung upon a fragile balance. A sudden shift in fortune, an economic crisis, a devastating plague, a cunning usurper could topple everything she had built. She needed heirs, some whispered, to solidify her dynasty. Others suggested she wed again, perhaps forging an even tighter bond with the North by marrying Jon Snow or another High Lord. Daenerys heard these murmurs but refrained from decisions that might entangle her personal life too deeply in politics. The idea of producing an heir sounded prudent, but she could not forget the heartbreak she had endured in Essos. For the moment, the realm was enough to occupy every waking hour of her life. One evening, in the 7th year of her reign, she climbed atop Drogon for a flight over the Blackwater Bay. City life had grown stifling, and she yearned to feel the wind against her face. Drogon took off from the Red Keep's courtyard with a thunderous beat of his wings, stirring dust and sending stable boys scattering. Daenerys rose into the twilight sky, the city unfurling beneath her, thousands of lanterns and torches forming a shimmering tapestry. Further out, she saw the coastline dotted with fishing boats returning for the night. She guided Drogon along the bay, feeling his powerful muscles coil beneath her. The ocean breeze mixed with the smell of brine. For a time, she let the dragon soar freely, skimming the waves, then rising high to circle the bay. From that vantage, King's Landing looked almost serene, a beacon of civilization rather than a battleground. She marveled at how different it was from the day she first approached, anticipating a fierce siege and endless carnage. As she gazed at the city's walls, she remembered again the ring of those bells, the hush that fell over her armies, the flutter in her chest when Cersei's men laid down their arms. That one act of surrender had saved thousands of lives. It had spared Daenerys from becoming her father's daughter in the eyes of the realm. It had opened a door to a future built not on fire and blood, but on stability, trade, and cautious hope. And here she was, years later, flying above a city that had accepted her. She guided Drogon back toward the Red Keep, her heart light with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. If she accomplished nothing else, she had ended a cycle of war, at least for a time. That alone was worth all the sacrifices. When she landed in the courtyard, dismounting with practiced ease, Grey Worm was there. He bowed, offering a small scroll that had just arrived from Storm's End. Daenerys read it, learning that Gendry's expansions had turned Storm's End into a more formidable port. The letter concluded with a brief note of thanks for believing in him when so many others did not. Daenerys felt a small smile tug at her lips. She handed the scroll back and walked inside, the flicker of torches guiding her through the corridors. She passed tapestries that depicted House Targaryen's conquests, Aegon the Conqueror, his sisters, their dragons. She considered how those ancestors might react to her reign of compromise and measured mercy. Some might call it weakness, but she believed it was the only way to truly break the wheel. She had no desire to be merely another conqueror who ground the realm beneath her. She wanted a future where the small folk did not quake every time a new banner was raised. In her private chambers, she shed her riding cloak and set aside her gloves, walking to the window that overlooked the city. The breeze carried a hint of the ocean's salt. Far off, she could see the glow of lanterns along the harbor. The hush of the evening wrapped around her, broken occasionally by the sound of distant laughter from the streets below. She let out a long breath, letting the tension of flight and rulership drain away. A few hours from now, she would sleep and wake to the demands of governance once more. But for this moment, she allowed herself to be simply Daenerys. Neither queen nor conqueror, just a woman who had once been a frightened exile. She thought of Yora, how he had believed in her from the start. She thought of Missandei, whose gentle guidance had steered her toward compassion. She thought of all those who had given their lives to see her on the throne. A soft pang touched her heart, mingled with gratitude. The door creaked and Tyrion entered, clearing his throat. He carried a ledger under one arm, always some piece of business to discuss. Daenerys turned from the window and gestured for him to proceed. He explained that the next month's expenditures looked higher than expected, partly due to continuing road repairs in the Crownlands. She nodded, acknowledging the cost of ensuring safe passage for merchants and farmers. Tyrion mused that the realm had never been so connected. The roads were busy with trade, new inns were springing up along the main highways, and local markets flourished. The taxes collected from this prosperity helped offset the crown's debts to the Iron Bank, which remained satisfied for now. That was the essence of the conversation, a mundane matter of budgeting that, in its own way, symbolized the normalcy Daenerys had carved out of chaos. Tyrion set the ledger down and looked at her with something akin to respect. "I used to think it was impossible for a Targaryen to rule this realm without half of it burning," he said softly. "We Lannisters always taught ourselves that Targaryens were mad or cruel or both. But you've proven me wrong. You've proven a lot of people wrong." Daenerys' eyes flicked to the ledger. "It's not finished," she said. "Nothing is ever finished. The realm changes day by day. I'm only guiding it the best I can." Tyrion let out a low chuckle. "And that might just be enough, Your Grace." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm glad I cast my lot with you." Daenerys nodded in acknowledgement. With that, Tyrion excused himself, leaving her to the quiet. She reflected on the improbable alliances that had formed, a Lannister serving a Targaryen, a Stark forging a bond with a Dragon Queen, an Ironborn warrior cooperating with men she once raided, a Baratheon bastard elevated to a lord. So many lines had been crossed, so many old hatreds set aside. And it had all begun on that morning when the bells rang and Cersei Lannister bowed her head in surrender. Fate could hinge on a single moment. Daenerys was determined to make the most of the peace that moment had birthed. She let her hand rest against the window frame. Far below, the city lights shimmered. Somewhere out there, children slept soundly, unafraid of hearing screams in the streets. In the countryside, farmers tended fields without fear of armies trampling their crops. Across the realm, houses rebuilt from the rubble of war. And in a distant septri, a woman who had once been queen walked in silence, haunted by the echoes of a path she might have chosen differently. Daenerys wondered if Cersei, in her silent reflections, ever felt regret for what her pride had nearly wrought. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Either way, the city stood unburned, and that was enough. Eventually, Daenerys turned from the window. She called for a servant to bring a light supper. The night stretched ahead, thick with stars. Another day's work awaited in the morning, more decisions, more burdens. But she carried them willingly, for it was the price of the throne she had claimed. In the quiet hush of her chambers, she thought again of the bells that had tolled for surrender. She remembered her own fury, her heartbreak, and how she had chosen, at last, to accept that surrender. That choice had saved King's Landing, saved her from becoming a monster, saved all the fragile hopes of Westeros from going up in dragonfire. She could not erase the tragedies that led her here. But she could and would shape the future with every careful step. As she sat down at the small table near the hearth, a plate of warm bread and fruit before her, she let her mind wander across the realm. In a stable in Winterfell, a peasant boy might be brushing down a horse, dreaming of knighthood. In a new inn along the King's Road, a family might be serving travelers hearty stew, earning enough coin to feed their children. In a watchtower in the Stormlands, a guard might be gazing out at the horizon, humming a tune about the Dragon Queen who spared the capital. In a small tavern in the Riverlands, old men might tell stories of how a single ring of bells changed the fate of nations. And in King's Landing, life thrived beneath the Targaryen banner, weaving a tapestry of daily struggles and triumphs, no longer overshadowed by the constant threat of war. Daenerys looked at the flames dancing in the hearth, remembering the day she had stood on a ship deck off Blackwater Bay, uncertain whether the city would be delivered into her hands peacefully or in ruin. She remembered how the city's walls had opened, how Jaime Lannister had ushered her in, how Cersei had stood before the Iron Throne, the crown lifted in trembling hands. That moment had felt unreal, as if time itself held its breath. And then Daenerys had accepted the surrender, forging a new destiny for herself, for the city, for all of Westeros. She sipped a cup of wine, letting the warmth flow through her. The door to her chamber was closed, the world reduced to the soft flicker of candlelight and the gentle crackle of the hearth. Somewhere in the keep, unsullied marched their patrol routes, ensuring no assassin or opportunist disturbed the queen's rest. She set the cup down and rubbed her temples, feeling the fatigue of leadership. Yet behind that fatigue lay a quiet determination. The city was hers. The realm was hers to guide. She would not falter. A faint roar echoed from outside, the sound of Drogon taking flight above the battlements. She smiled, picturing him silhouetted against the moon, a dark shape gliding over a city at peace. In the distance, a bell chimed the late hour, a gentle toll that signaled the passing of time rather than the threat of invasion. She listened to it, each ring resonating in her chest. Once, bells had heralded her greatest choice, the moment she had spared King's Landing. Now, they simply marked the hours of a realm that continued onward without fear of dragonfire. It was a small but profound victory. Finishing her meal, she rose, snuffed out most of the candles, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be another day of decisions, petitions, alliances, and challenges. She would face them as she always had, with resilience, hope, and the unwavering determination not to repeat the mistakes of those who came before her. The old era of Lannister rule was gone, surrendered to the promise of something new. For all the conflicts yet to come, Daenerys believed in the path she had chosen, a path shaped by acceptance rather than annihilation. She slipped beneath the covers, the hush of the red keep enveloping her, and let herself rest. In the darkness of her bedchamber, she allowed a final thought to drift through her mind. That somewhere, in the annals of history, scribes would write of a city spared from ruin by the stroke of fate, of a queen who broke the cycle of vengeance at the final moment, of an unlikely peace built on mercy rather than fear. And though no one could say how long that peace would last, Daenerys Targaryen intended to defend it with every fiber of her being. The bells had tolled once, and she had answered with mercy. The realm still stood, battered but alive, and that was the best legacy she could ever hope to leave. As the 8th year of Daenerys Targaryen's reign began, the people of King's Landing awoke each morning to find themselves in a capital that, for once, did not tremble under the threat of imminent war. The transformation the city had undergone since Cersei's surrender was too profound to be denied. New aqueducts brought fresh water to districts that had once reeked of decay, expanded roads made travel and commerce swifter than ever, and the city watch, bolstered by a blend of unsullied discipline and Westerosi practicality, maintained a semblance of order that even the harshest cynics admitted was an improvement. A traveler arriving in the harbor might see peddlers hawking fish and fruit, bright banners fluttering atop newly built spires, and the Red Keep's high walls rising elegantly above it all, crowned by the black and crimson flag of House Targaryen. In the quiet of the royal apartments, Daenerys woke early each day to the same ritual. She would open the tall windows that overlooked the city's rooftops, breathe in the sea-tinted air, and let her gaze drift to the horizon. Often, she would see Drogon's silhouette circling somewhere near the dragon pit, his roar carrying across the morning sky. The city below would be stirring to life, fishmongers setting up stalls by the docks, bakers lighting ovens in Flea Bottom, blacksmiths hammering out the day's first orders in the Street of Steel. It was a far cry from the day she had first entered King's Landing under the hush of surrender bells, the memory of Rhaegal's death and Missandei's execution still raw in her chest. At times, she could almost feel their presences lingering, guiding her forward with a silent plea to lead more gently than others before her had ruled. She often thought of Missandei when she addressed her courtiers, striving to remember the measured compassion her friend had embodied. Jorah Mormont's face would flicker in her memory when she confronted challenges that might have tempted her to a more ruthless response. He had believed in her better angels until his dying breath. She bore their losses like scars, using them to remind herself that her throne was not merely a seat of power, but a seat of responsibility. And so she would don her royal garments, cloaks sewn of fine but not ostentatious materials, embroidered with discreet dragon motifs rather than the flamboyant styles of past Targaryens, and meet the day's burdens with her head high. Tyrion, her hand, still bore the weight of endless administrative tasks. He would appear in the council chamber at first light, bleary-eyed from yet another late evening poring over ledgers. More often than not, Ser Davos was already there, stroking his beard thoughtfully while scanning trade reports from the Crownlands or the North. Each morning, they would greet Daenerys with the day's pressing matters. A dispute between two minor lords, a request for new farmland in the Reach, an unsubstantiated rumor of bandit raids along the Rose Road, an update from Dorne on border tensions near the Stormlands. She listened carefully, offering input that balanced the realm's needs with her desire to avoid tyranny. If she had been a conqueror in the old days of Essos, she was now a ruler tempered by time, heartbreak, and hard-won experience. But for all the city's newfound calm, Westeros remained a land of many voices and many secrets. Allies could become rivals if their ambitions were thwarted. Rivals might creep into positions of influence if they perceived weakness. Daenerys was mindful that her father's downfall had begun in subtle ways. Broken oaths, shifting loyalties, a slow descent into paranoia. She refused to let fear guide her, but neither would she be complacent. She'd allowed the position of Master of Whispers to remain vacant for some time after Varys' betrayal, but with each passing year, Tyrion pressed her to consider appointing someone new who could keep her informed about the realm's hidden currents. Daenerys hesitated, not wanting to encourage the same webs of treachery that once defined King's Landing. Yet the demands of rule were unrelenting. The day might come, Tyrion warned her, when she needed eyes and ears beyond her direct reach. Late in the autumn of the 8th year, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Sansa Stark extended a formal invitation to Daenerys, urging her to attend a grand feast that would celebrate a year of fruitful harvest in the north. It had been Sansa's custom to hold such feasts each year, gathering her bannermen, forging unity among a people who had been fractured by wars and the undead threat years prior. This time, the missive suggested that the queen's presence might heal any lingering mistrust between North and South once and for all. Daenerys read the letter in the council chamber, glancing at Tyrion, Jon Snow, and Ser Davos. Jon had been traveling between Winterfell and King's Landing intermittently, always caught between love for his homeland and loyalty to Daenerys' cause. Tyrion's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise. Even he had to admit this was a significant olive branch. Daenerys felt a swirl of hesitation. She was no longer the brash conqueror who demanded fealty in a throne room dripping with tension. She understood now the importance of courtesy and tact. The North had learned to coexist with her rule, but the echoes of the old resentments, Aegon the Conqueror's subjugation of the North, the bitter memories of the Mad King, her own perceived threat, still lingered in the hearts of some northern lords. She remembered how her first arrival at Winterfell had been a study in scowls and whispered judgments. Perhaps this was an opportunity to mend old wounds. She decided to accept. Though the journey north would not be easy in late autumn, it could be done by sea if they skirted the eastern coast, or by the King's Road if they hurried before the worst snows. Jon suggested traveling with a moderate retinue rather than a grand procession. He warned that while many northerners had grown used to her rule, they still valued humility in their leaders. Preparations began swiftly. Daenerys designated Tyrion and Ser Davos to remain behind and manage the city in her absence. Grey Worm she would bring to lead a small force of Unsullied for her personal protection. Drogon, of course, would accompany her, though Jon quietly suggested that keeping the dragon from overshadowing the entire gathering might be prudent. Daenerys could not help but recall how the sight of 2 dragons had once alarmed northern folk. Now she had only Drogon, her last living child, but she vowed to be sensitive to the tensions his presence might evoke. Still, Drogon went wherever she went. If she had learned anything in her years of rule, it was that a queen's vulnerabilities were often exploited by those who craved chaos. The day of departure dawned cold and crisp. A hush settled over King's Landing as Daenerys' party rode through the city gates, banners snapping in a brisk wind. Commoners gathered to watch, offering polite cheers or curious stares. Many still remembered how she had arrived, not in a blaze of fire, but through the city's peaceful surrender. The Unsullied marched in disciplined rows, carrying spears and shields etched with the 3-headed dragon. Jon Snow rode near Daenerys, clad in warm leathers, the Stark sigil on his cloak. Beyond the city's walls, a caravan of supply wagons followed, loaded with gifts for the northern harvest feast, barrels of Dornish wine, casks of southern spices, and fine textiles from the Crownlands to show good faith. It took them nearly 2 weeks to traverse the King's Road up past the Blackwater and beyond the fields that ringed the capital. The autumn chill grew harsher with each league. The gold and red leaves of the southern forests gave way to sturdier pines, and the nights became long and biting. Daenerys rode at the head of the column, keeping pace on a sturdy mare. Drogon soared overhead, occasionally vanishing beyond sight to hunt, then returning with a shriek that echoed over the hills. Villages along the road greeted the Queen's procession with curiosity, some with excitement. The North had not forgotten the help she and Jon had provided against the undead, and though many still viewed her with cautious respect rather than adoration, few had any desire to provoke the Dragon Queen who had chosen mercy in King's Landing. Midway through the journey, they halted at an inn near Moat Cailin. The ancient fortress, perched on the edge of the swamplands that marked the gateway to the north, was a stark reminder of the region's tumultuous history. Once, Moat Cailin guarded the north against invasions from southern kings, its crumbling towers a testament to how many armies had tried and failed to break through. Daenerys dismounted outside the inn, surveying the mossy stones of the fortress. She felt a strange pang of memory, recalling how she herself had once seemed an invader to these lands. Yet now she arrived not as a conqueror, but as a guest. The inn's rooms were modest, the fires in the hearth barely warding off the chill. Jon helped oversee lodging for the Unsullied guards who accompanied them, while Grey Worm arranged the night's watch. Daenerys found herself in a cramped corner of the common room, sipping spiced wine as she listened to the wind rustle the inn's thatch roof. It reminded her of earlier days in Essos, traveling across uncertain terrain with only a handful of followers. She supposed, ironically, that her entire reign had been shaped by journeys, some triumphant, some sorrowful. The next morning, they set out again, crossing into the heart of the north. As they drew closer to Winterfell, the temperatures dropped even further, and snow flurries began to drift through the air. Daenerys had felt cold in the north once before, but after so many years in King's Landing's mild climate, the bite in the wind seemed sharper than ever. She wrapped herself in furs and pressed on. By the time they reached Winterfell's gates, the sky was gray with the promise of heavier snowfall. Northern guards opened the portcullis, admitting Daenerys's procession into the bailey. The courtyard bustled with stable hands, servants, and curious onlookers craning their necks to see the Dragon Queen's arrival. Sansa Stark stood waiting at the foot of the Great Hall steps, flanked by members of her household. She wore a heavy cloak of gray wool trimmed with white fur, and her red hair was pinned in a coronet that gave her a regal air. Despite the frosty welcome of their first meeting years ago, her features now held a degree of warmth, cautious but genuine. Jon dismounted and embraced his sister. Daenerys approached, recalling the tension that had once thrummed in this very courtyard when the northern lords eyed her with suspicion. Now, Sansa stepped forward and inclined her head respectfully. Daenerys did the same. Words were exchanged, polite and unstrained, about the journey and the weather. Sansa welcomed Daenerys to Winterfell, expressing her hope that the harvest feast would mark a new chapter in North-South relations. Daenerys, in turn, thanked her for the invitation and pledged her continued support for the North's well-being. Their eyes met blue on violet, and whatever old resentments might have lingered seemed to fade beneath the pressing realities of governance. There was no advantage in hostility now. The realm had endured enough conflict. Servants led Daenerys to guest chambers overlooking the courtyard. She stripped off her travel-stained cloak, shivering as she adjusted to the cooler interior. A fire already crackled in the hearth, courtesy of Sansa's hospitality. Outside, snow began to fall with greater intensity, cloaking Winterfell's walls in a blanket of white. From her window, Daenerys could see Drogon perched on a distant rise, steam curling from his nostrils. He disliked the cold, but he would endure for her sake. Grey Worm supervised the Unsullied's encampment in the outer courtyard, ensuring they found a measure of shelter against the weather. Despite the North's wariness of foreign troops, no confrontation occurred. Many in Winterfell recognized that these were the same soldiers who had helped defend the castle during the Long Night, years before. The feast commenced that same evening in Winterfell's Great Hall. Servants lit torches and candelabras, filling the space with flickering warmth. Tables overflowed with northern fare, roasted game, stewed turnips, black bread, hot spiced cider. Lords and ladies from various northern houses attended, their sigils displayed on cloaks or doublets, House Glover's mailed fist, House Mormont's bear, House Serwyn's battle-axe, and more. Sansa sat at the head table with Daenerys on one side and Jon on the other. To Daenerys's right was Lord Royce from the Vale, who had traveled north for the occasion. The hall was filled with the low murmur of conversation as guests eyed the queen. She could sense their curiosity. Many had not seen her in years, and the stories that drifted north were mixed. Some described her as a benevolent ruler who valued justice, others cautioned that she still held the capacity to unleash dragonfire if provoked. Cautious courtesies gave way to a modest flow of ale and wine. Soon, a handful of minstrels took up their instruments, performing ballads that told of the defeat of the Night King, the forging of alliances, the rebuilding of Westeros. Daenerys recognized, with a twinge of irony, that some lines had already been embellished to a mythic scale. There were verses portraying her as a near-divine figure who soared across the skies to vanquish undead hordes, and lines depicting Jon Snow as a resurrected hero of ancient prophecy. Daenerys neither encouraged nor refuted the lyrics. She simply sipped her ale and let the songs wash over her. Myths were part of the realm's tapestry. She was more concerned with the mundane realities of harvest yields and local disputes than with how bards chose to glorify or distort the past. Midway through the feast, Sansa stood and quieted the hall with a raised hand. The lords and ladies looked to her, the crackling of fire the only sound. Sansa announced that Winterfell's harvest had been bountiful thanks to a cooperative climate and the efforts of the small folk who had toiled in the fields. In recognition of that, she wished to toast the realm's peace, fragile though it might be, and to thank the queen who had traveled so far. Daenerys felt the eyes of the hall upon her as she stood. She expressed gratitude for the North's perseverance, recalled the days when they had all stood together against the undead threat, and voiced her hope that these bonds would endure. The applause that followed was cautious but sincere. Daenerys sensed that while not all hearts were one, most recognized the practical value of unity. Sansa resumed her seat, exchanging a measured smile with Daenerys. The tension of previous years had softened into something resembling mutual respect. Later in the evening, Jon led Daenerys around the hall, introducing her to various northern lords who had joined them. Lord Glover, an older man with graying temples, expressed relief that the long night was behind them and commented that the realm's new roads had allowed for greater trade between the north and the south. Lady Mormont, this one a niece of the late Lyanna Mormont, stood tall, recounting how she had taken up the mantle of leadership on Bear Island and was committed to rebuilding. Daenerys listened intently, taking note of specific concerns. The North needed more iron for tools, more coin to build fishing fleets, and continued cooperation against roving bandits. She promised to look into ways the Crown could help, including trade agreements with northern merchants who might purchase or from the Westerlands and ship it north. She was no stranger to forging deals by this point. Diplomacy had become as vital to her reign as any sword or dragon. On the second day of the festival, Sansa arranged a friendly hunt in the nearby woods. Daenerys had little enthusiasm for hunting, but she recognized its importance in northern culture. She rode out alongside Sansa, Jon, Grey Worm, and a contingent of northern knights. The forest was quiet, the ground blanketed in fresh snow that crunched under horses' hooves. Frosted pines and skeletal birches framed the paths. A hush lay over the party as they tracked deer or smaller game, letting the hounds lead. Now and then, the group would pause while a knight loosed an arrow at a fleeing stag. Most shots went wide. Daenerys wondered if the animals sensed their pursuers from a distance, for the morning proved poor for a kill. Jon took it in stride, remarking that it was more about camaraderie than the actual catch. Sansa seemed content to be outdoors, cheeks flushed with cold, her eyes alert. Daenerys could see that Winterfell's lady was no longer the timid girl of old. She exuded a steady confidence. That evening, Sansa asked Daenerys to walk with her along the ramparts of Winterfell. The sky was clear, revealing a scatter of stars above. Breath misted in the frosty air. Torches and iron sconces lit the stone walls, and from that vantage, one could see the snow-covered expanse of the north stretching beyond, silent and immense. Sansa led Daenerys to a quiet corner, far from prying ears. They stood side by side, gazing at the moonlit courtyard below. Sansa broke the silence first. She said she remembered how deeply she had distrusted Daenerys back when they first met. She had feared another tyrant on the Iron Throne, someone who would subjugate the North and demand unconditional fealty. But she had watched over the years how Daenerys ruled King's Landing. No brutal purges, no mass burnings, but rather an emphasis on rebuilding. She confessed that reports of Daenerys' leniency toward Cersei and the rebuilding of King's Landing had surprised her. It was not the story she expected from a Targaryen with dragons at her back. Daenerys listened, aware that old grievances did not simply melt away. She recalled, too, her initial anger at the North's reluctance to embrace her cause. In a soft voice, she explained that Essos had taught her many lessons, and that losing her closest friends, Jorah Missandei, had tempered her fury with sorrow. She had felt the pull to burn King's Landing in retribution for their deaths, but in the end, Cersei's surrender had altered the course. She looked at Sansa and said that sometimes one moment of mercy or choice could shape decades of history. The two women stood quietly, letting the weight of those words settle. At length, Sansa nodded, not in capitulation, but in a resigned sort of acceptance. Daenerys sensed that the last real obstacle between them had begun to thaw. By the festival's final day, the hall was filled with a sense of subdued camaraderie. Bonds had formed among knights who once cared little for each other. Northerners dined beside unsullied soldiers, exchanging halting conversation. Even the hounds seemed relaxed, trotting about the courtyard sniffing at visitors. On the eve of Daenerys' departure, Sansa rose before the assembled lords and ladies, formally recognizing the queen's visit. As a token of gratitude, she presented Daenerys with a small chest containing a cloak trimmed in the fur of a rare white fox, harvested by Mormont huntsmen. The gift was an unmistakable sign of northern esteem, though it was far from lavish. Daenerys accepted it graciously, draping it over her shoulders. The hall cheered, and for a moment, the old divisions between dragon and wolf felt distant. Jon watched from a corner, a hint of relief softening his features. Early the next morning, Daenerys and her retinue prepared to depart. Snow still dusted the courtyard. Sansa and Jon stood near the stables, seeing them off. Daenerys and Sansa exchanged a final embrace, brief and formal but earnest. Jon would remain in Winterfell for a time longer, settling certain northern matters. Daenerys felt a twinge of longing to have him by her side again, for his counsel and his quiet presence had become a steady reassurance in King's Landing. But she understood his duty to his homeland. With farewells said, Daenerys mounted her horse. Grey Worm led the Unsullied, and the column wound its way out of Winterfell's gates, heading south. Overhead, Drogon soared, a dark shape against the gray sky. The journey back was harsher. A fierce storm pelted them with sleet and snow, forcing the group to find shelter in a series of small holdfasts and inns. Daenerys braved the cold with the new fox fur cloak wrapped around her, recalling the subtle nod of respect from the Lady of Winterfell. She was amused at how a mere garment could symbolize something so vast as the potential unity of the North and South. Yet she cherished it as a token that peace might not be an illusion. They pressed on, halting only when necessary, determined to reach warmer latitudes before winter's fangs grew worse. When they neared Moat Cailin again, Daenerys dispatched a raven to Tyrion, letting him know she would likely return to King's Landing in a fortnight if weather permitted. Before the raven even reached its destination, however, events in the capital were already brewing. In Daenerys' absence, Tyrion had overseen the daily affairs of the realm, dealing with disputes and finalizing trade deals. But a shadow had crept into the city, a rumor that spread through taverns and alleyways about a gathering of disgruntled Westerosi lords. Whispers spoke of an emerging figure who claimed descent from the Blackfyres, an offshoot branch of the Targaryen line that had long been considered extinct. This rumor was not entirely new. Pretenders had arisen before, especially in Essos. Yet the talk this time was more insistent, hinting that certain minor houses resentful of Daenerys' policies might lend clandestine support to a new claimant. Tyrion did not relay all of this to Daenerys immediately, hoping to confirm details first. He attempted to gather information discreetly, employing a few reliable informants left in King's Landing. Though the Queen had never formally appointed a Master of Whispers, Tyrion maintained small networks from his days of survival in a city rife with intrigues. The reports he received were troubling. Gatherings in hidden cellars, discussions of how this so-called Blackfyre descendant might challenge Daenerys' rule by sowing discord among those who feared the Targaryen name. Tyrion was no stranger to political maneuvering, and he doubted these conspirators posed an immediate threat. Daenerys' hold on power was too firm, her alliances too broad. Still, the last thing the realm needed was a new wave of unrest, especially with winter intensifying in the north and harvests crucial in the south. Tyrion resolved to handle it quietly if possible. Daenerys and her escort finally reached the Crownlands as the days grew shorter. The autumn leaves had largely fallen, leaving skeletal branches against a gray sky. She longed for the milder breezes of the earlier year, but such was the cycle of the seasons. When the walls of King's Landing came into view, her spirits lifted. Home was a strange concept for someone who had wandered across Essos, but now she felt that the capital, with all its flaws and histories, was truly hers. She remembered a time when she dreamed only of stepping foot in the Red Keep, her birthright denied. She had it now, and it was more burden than she had ever imagined, but also more purpose. The city gates opened at her approach, and throngs of onlookers gathered to watch her return. Some waved hats and kerchiefs, others simply stared. She offered small smiles, mindful that the Queen's presence meant reassurance to some and a reminder of authority to others. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Tyrion waited with his usual half-smile. As soon as Daenerys dismounted, Grey Worm saluted, indicating that the royal guard would settle in. Tyrion approached, bowing slightly before ushering Daenerys inside. The warmth of the keep's corridors was welcome after so many days in the cold. Servants took her cloak, and she allowed herself a moment to breathe in the familiar sense of the palace. Candle wax, old stone, hints of sweet incense. She glanced at Tyrion, sensing a tension in his expression. Once they were alone in the council chamber, Tyrion explained the rumors swirling about the city. He tried to minimize alarm, insisting that these conspirators were likely disorganized, a handful of malcontents clinging to improbable fantasies. Yet he also believed that ignoring them outright would be a mistake. Daenerys listened carefully, recalling how her own father's paranoia had led to atrocities, but so had his complacency about Tywin Lannister's power. She would not replicate either error. She asked Tyrion for any names or houses implicated so far. He rattled off a few lesser-known houses from the Stormlands and the Reach, each with a possible grievance. Lost lands, perceived slights, or old loyalties to a Targaryen line they considered more legitimate than Daenerys's. The word Blackfire surfaced again, a name that conjured stories of rebellion and bloodshed from generations past. Daenerys decided on a measured approach. She would not launch a citywide purge. Such an act would only fan the flames, lending credence to the idea that she ruled by terror. Instead, she would invite these disgruntled houses to King's Landing for a formal hearing on their complaints, offering them an open forum to speak of their grievances. If they refused or remained hidden, it would expose their dishonesty. If they accepted, she could address their concerns directly, possibly winning them over or at least exposing the ringleaders. Tyrion agreed this was wise, albeit risky. Open hearings could devolve into public displays of resentment. Still, it was better than letting conspiracies fester in the dark. Within a week of Daenerys' return, ravens flew to each house rumored to harbor dissent, summoning them to the capital under the Queen's protection. Meanwhile, Grey Worm quietly increased patrols in and around the city. Daenerys also conferred with a few knights she trusted to ride out and gather intelligence, ensuring that no sudden uprisings caught them unawares. Life in King's Landing went on. Markets bustled, ships unloaded cargo in the harbor, and the city watch maintained order. Yet an undercurrent of suspense crept into the daily hum. People whispered about this Blackfire pretender, uncertain whether to dismiss it as another fool's claim or to fret that it could upend the Queen's reign.